The story begins with several warriors preparing for a war. They were facing a hill, where there was another army that seemed to have many more soldiers. In their midst, a person in very strange armor suddenly appeared. She had eyes on her elbows that seemed to be alive, and on the breastplate of the armor was a face with an open mouth. As this figure passed by a crucified person, he commented that there was a beautiful view in that place and ordered the crucified person to keep his eyes wide open, because the soldiers who were there would soon be torn to pieces. He should listen to the last breaths of his allies, because he wanted to show the world the legendary deeds of that body. Then he ordered his army to advance, cutting down everything that blocked the way ahead. One by one, the soldiers begin to die, while he says that they must feel the power of a superior race. The soldiers in red armor kill each of their opponents, and later, the battlefield is littered with bodies, surrounded by vultures that devour the carcasses. The figure in the strange armor approaches the crucified man and says that it's been hard to smile lately because all the strong men have died. Fighting is no longer fun, and combat has lost its thrill. The crucified man calls the man in red armor a demon, but he replies that this world is not much different from the real hell. Everyone there is a demon. Meanwhile, on the edge of Camp's castle, we see a boy running, followed by two others who seem to be chasing him. The boy, called Leto, tries to run away, while the others shout that if they don't go back, they will die. They warn that if they are caught running, they will be punished, but Leto, increasingly angry, says that he will never be caught, because the pursuers only shout and don't run. Distracted, he doesn't notice a hole ahead of him and ends up falling in. The two pursuers are shocked, since their task was to catch him. One of them asks what they're going to do now, and the other decides to go down to get him, because if they come back empty-handed, they'll end up dead. While one suggests waiting, the other realizes that they have fallen into a gnome's nest and believes that Leto is already dead. He just doesn't know it yet. Meanwhile, Leto gets up from his fall, realizing that he's in a cave and needs to get out. As he tries to move, he bumps into webs and wonders what that is. Without realizing it, a spider begins to approach him. Outside, under the colorful sky, one of the pursuers comments that the battle is lost and that they will have to recover Leto's body later. The other refuses to go down until a figure in armor and cape appears behind them, shocking them both. Suddenly, the head of one of them is torn off. The other, in shock, sees that the figure is the man in red armor. He asks why his subordinates, who should be in the castle, are there. Nervously, the soldier explains that a slave tried to escape and they chased him to that place, but he fell into the area of the spiders. The man in armor asks if they have fallen into the nest of the blinking spiders and concludes that the slave must already be dead. He comments that the slave is replaceable, so he doesn't understand the concern. The soldier nervously explains that the slave stuck a fork in Prince Homer's eye and ran away, and that the prince wants the slave back alive. The man in armor laughs out loud, making the soldier even more nervous. Suddenly, he gets serious and says that it's ridiculous for a future king to have his eye gouged out by a slave. He asks about the knights of the castle, but the soldier can't answer. The man in armor then decides to take care of the blinking spiders himself, saying that if the slave is bitten by a female, it will be even more of a nuisance. He jumps into the hole. When he reaches the bottom, he makes a noise and attracts the attention of a spider, which he quickly decapitates. Other spiders begin to surround him, but he uses his knife dance to cut through each one with ease. While impaling another spider, he comments that he has never seen so many males for a single female, and deduces that there must be a huge spider there. The armor then asks its master if it can eat, and the man confirms, reminding him that blinking spiders are his armor's favorite. The armor's mouth opens, revealing sharp teeth, and a dark magic shoots out to devour the spider's corpses. After devouring several of them, the man in armor continues on his way, entering a hidden corridor, convinced that the real nest is there. Upon entering, the man in armor cuts through the webs that had trapped several people and takes a look around. Opening a cocoon, he finds bodies with their skin completely eaten away, as if they had been drained. He comments that they had certainly been drained by the spider but had died smiling, as the spider's venom causes pleasure before death. However, the real problem was not the corpses, but the open cocoon, indicating that someone had escaped. He thinks that to have survived, the person was probably bitten by the female spider. Silently, he begins to search for a presence and shouts for the person to appear, saying that they were probably hiding behind a rock. Leto, who really was hiding there, thinks he has been discovered. The man in armor says that if he comes out now, he won't kill him. However, Leto believes that he will be killed anyway, so he remains hidden. The man starts counting to 3, and Leto, desperate, thinks of the 3 races that dominate that world: the yellow-skinned humans, the green-skinned folk, and the blue-skinned elves, the ultimate predators. Leto slowly comes out of his hiding place and sits down on a rock. The man in armor compliments his quick thinking and asks how old he is. Leto replies that he is 15, but he is actually thinking about how to escape. Without warning, the man cuts Leto's eyes, who feels intense pain and falls to his knees. The man comments that Leto's eyes were searching for a way out, weren't they? He explains that, normally, He would have killed Leto on the spot, but something about him caught his eye. Now he wants to talk. Leto, unable to see, asks what he's talking about. And the man in armor mentions the incident in which Leto stabbed Prince Homer in the eye with a fork. He says that if Leto makes him laugh, he'll let him live. But Leto, desperate, knows that there is a spider bite on his back and thinks that this man is a lunatic, finding it all amusing. The man in armor then threatens to kill him, and Leto, desperate, introduces himself and starts telling him about his past. Half a year ago, Leto's parents were killed by an elf, and he and his brother were taken as slaves. He was sold to another state, separated from his brother. Now, he could barely survive, receiving only a bowl of barley a day. He remembers a day when he was cleaning a cage, feeling miserable, until he was almost attacked by a ferocious creature, a Cerberus. Leto had always thought that Cerberuses had 3 heads, but this one didn't seem to. He looks at the creature sympathetically and asks if it wants to come out of its cage, but the Cerberus just growls in response. Leto comments that he too would like to escape from his own cage. Just then, one of the guards who chased Leto away earlier appears and orders him back to work, kicking him and saying that he's just a slave. The guard humiliates him, saying he must accept his fate and asking if he wants to die. In the present, the man in armor asks Leto if he wants to die, finding his story boring. He is then more interested in how Leto managed to get close to Prince Homer and hurt him. The man wants to know how Leto managed to stab the prince, since he always has a bodyguard nearby. Leto begins. That afternoon, the castle received a visitor, a noblewoman called Lady Batory, who had come exclusively to see the prince's Cerberus. According to Leto, Lady Batory was an extremely ugly woman. In the hall were the prince, Lady Batory, his bodyguard, and himself. The prince wanted to tame Cerberus in order to use it at his coronation. Leto remembered that it was that damned blue elf who killed his mother, and while he was thinking about it, the bodyguard told him to go away because he stank of shit. Leto left obediently, but he knew that his enemy was ahead of him, and he couldn't let the opportunity pass. He had planned to escape the following night, but decided to act right then and there. Leto then reveals a secret. Inside the lock of Cerberus's cage, he planted a seed half a year ago. This seed became a plant that grew, until one day it managed to break through the lock mechanism. Just then, Leto shouts, "Sandal, it's time to eat!" He picks up a piece of meat and throws it. The piece of meat hits the bodyguard right on the bald head, at which point the cage bursts open as the padlock breaks completely, without the guard noticing. Cerberus approaches him and unceremoniously gobbles up the bald man's head. The prince becomes desperate and keeps his guard down. At that moment, Leto pulls out his fork and takes aim at the prince's eye. We see a precise scene to describe what happened. A fork right in the cherry because that's what Leto felt. The prince cries out in pain, and in the present, the armorer asks, "Calm down! How could a slave have a fork with him?" Leto explains that the fork accidentally came with Cerberus's food. The booby-trapped blue elf gives a big smile and says that the prince is a sucker. He's been forked in the eye. Leto explains that while Cerberus was in a fit of rage, he took advantage of the chaos to escape. Near Cerberus's cage, there was a hole that he dug himself. This led him to another place where there were also guards, but taking advantage of the fences and bridges, he hid and managed to get out of the castle by jumping into the water and swimming. Looking at the castle on the horizon, Leto shouts at the prince to wait, because one day he will get stronger, tear out his other eye and kill him too. He continues the story to the trapped man, telling him that he ran until he was found by the castle servants and then fell into this cave. The trapped blue elf stares at him and stands up, saying that Leto's story was quite interesting, in fact even fun to listen to, but the elf says he can't save Leto. Leto asks why, and the trapped man asks if he was bitten by the spider. Wasn't it that damn green-eyed spider, the female blinking spider? The elf asks if it's getting hot for him, because as Leto's eyes recover, he will start to see again. This cure comes from the spider, and the elf only cut out Leto's eyes to prove his theory, but he knew that Leto was pretending not to see. Leto is shocked that he already knew this. The elf explains that blinking spiders reproduce by injecting eggs into other creatures, which gives the host special powers. Soon, Leto will lose his senses and become a monster, devouring everything in sight. When the eggs hatch, they will eat Leto from the inside out. Desperate to learn that there are spiders inside him, Leto tries to deny it, but the elf, saying he liked the story, promises mercy, offering to kill him painlessly. Leto refuses, saying that he needs to find his brother, and that it is the elf who will die today. He begins to feel something different inside, a sense of power. Feeling that it's worth a try, he lunges at the elf with his fork. As the fork approaches, the elf turns and stabs Leto, but his blade hits something, a spider's fang that has grown on Leto's body, blocking the sword. Impressed, the elf throws Leto away and kicks him in the stomach, sending him to the bottom of the cave. He realizes that Leto's mutation has started very quickly. Leto emerges from the smoke and lets out a ferocious scream. Large claws begin to appear, and Leto, although in pain, is shocked to see the changes. The elf, Laughing, comments that Leto now has a fork arm. Leto, confused, wonders if his arm has really been transformed, but leaves that to think about later, focusing on the elf. He quickly goes in for the attack, but the elf whispers in Leto's ear that he's adorable, before making a deep cut in his chest, causing him to spit blood, but without killing him. Meanwhile, in the castle of Camps, a doctor sews up the prince's eye, saying that it will take 2 months to heal completely. The prince, angry, asks for a mirror, and when he looks at himself, he explodes with rage, throwing the doctor from the tower, who dies in the fall. The prince picks up his sword and, furious, asks if they have found the cursed slave yet. One of the Effie replies that the servants are looking for him, but the prince orders them to forget the servants and send the soldiers. Lady intervenes, asking the prince to calm down, reminding him that he is crucial at this moment. After all, someone has prepared everything, and the prince must keep his promise after becoming king. Meanwhile, returning to the Battle of the Cutlery, knife against fork, Leto is recovering, but he's tired of this fight. He doesn't think he has the slightest chance of beating the elf. After all, none of his attacks have hit him so far, but he can't die there. He has to find his brother. The elf laughs and asks if Leto wants another chance. The elf then offers a proposal. If Leto fights for him, he will be part of a special force personally created by the elf, made up of warriors who fight only for him. In addition, he promises to remove the spider eggs from Leto's body. Leto questions the sudden change, remembering that the elf tried to kill him earlier. He suspects it's a trick, but the elf explains that people like him, who are bitten by the female and don't lose their sanity, are extremely rare. He says that he likes Leto and that the job is simple: obey him. At this point, Leto finds himself tasked with killing other humans. Shocked by the proposal to kill his fellow humans, he accepts without much thought, feeling that he has no other choice. After all, if he doesn't accept, he'll die right there. Leto thinks that he will eventually be able to escape from the elf. The elf, satisfied, laughs and says it was a good choice. But suddenly, he attacks Leto. Leto manages to dodge, but realizes that the attack wasn't aimed at him. A creature, a person, was behind them the whole time, attached to the ceiling. It is no longer a victim of the female spider, but a person who is not transformed. The elf explains that this person is part of the assassin's unit called Estileto, and thinks that Prince Romero is involved in some plan with the law of Batory. The elf also comments that this assassin won't be able to kill him, and laughs when he remembers that the Estileto assassins don't speak, as their vocal cords have been cut. The assassin, clearly irritated, can't respond. Just then, more people emerge from the shadows, their eyes staring at the group. They are other victims of the female spider, elves transformed by the mutation of the spider eggs. The elf only makes an expression of disgust at the sight of the transformed, while Leto wonders who these people are and what is going on. In the distance, he sees a passage and realizes that this is his chance to escape. Leto decides to run away during the fight, taking advantage of the distraction. He takes a step towards the exit, but before he can act, one of the mutants rushes at the elf, who dodges and rips his head off. Other mutants attack the elf, but Leto, ignored because he is also a mutant, takes the opportunity to escape. The stiletto killer watches Leto running away, but decides he doesn't need to worry about him, believing that Leto will soon die from the spider eggs. His target is the elf Kaim Belson. We finally know the name of the trapped elf. The assassin plans to hide in the shadows and wait for the right moment to slit Kane's throat. Meanwhile, Kane fights the mutants, dodging and killing them one by one, ripping their heads off. He uses his knife dance skills and quickly eliminates several opponents, cutting off necks, trunks, and heads. While Kane is killing the last mutant, the stiletto killer sees his chance and advances, using the dark step technique, believing that Kane won't notice him. His plan is to gouge out Kane's eyes from behind. However, the eyes on Kane's armor are not merely decorative, and the assassin realizes this too late. Meanwhile, Leto crosses the passage and celebrates his escape. He thinks those idiots are killing themselves, while he goes in search of a place with civilization, where he can find a doctor capable of removing the spider eggs from his body. He then plans to look for his brother, and continue strengthening himself for his revenge. Leto vows to cut off the heads of the cursed prince, the elf Kane, and the disgraced Greenskin. He realizes that he is getting used to the giant fork in his hand. Finally reaching the surface, Leto thinks that Kane must be dead by now, but when he emerges, Kane is already there, waiting for him. "Look, have you made it up yet?" asks Kane, surprising Leto. Before he can react, Kane kicks him in the head, warning him that if Leto tries to escape again, he will die. Kane also warns Leto not to answer his questions, as he is in a bad mood. At this point, Leto replies that he has understood the message, and Kane orders him to call him Master from now on. They need to get out of there quickly, because another assassin could appear. Leto, frustrated, replies replies sarcastically, "Yes, master." The narrative delves into the story of Cain, known as the Knight of the Knife, a title he earned by cutting through humans like butter. He led the dreaded Red Army, an invincible march against countless humans. Cain is considered a hero by the continent, but he also inspires terror in all humans. Lide, the prince's advisor, says that of the 13 horsemen, Cain is the most powerful. She even says that if Prince Romero tries to kill him, he should prepare his own funeral. However, Prince Romero, now wearing an eye patch, which, according to the doctor, has made him look cooler, says that if he wants to be king one day, he will have to kill Cain sooner or later. If he fails in this attempt, he will bring the Red Army, his father's army, to take revenge. Romero mentions that he has heard that many soldiers are loyal to Cain, but Lede reassures him, saying that the stiletto assassins are ruthless and never let a target escape alive, no matter if it is Cain or the king himself. The prince then reveals his grudge, blaming his father for passing the throne on to Cain and not to him. Romero decides that he will have his father killed too. He warns his bodyguard, Countess, that he has already gathered some very useful people for his plans. When Leda asks where he's going, Romero replies that he's not going to kill Cain himself, but to capture the slave who left him blind in one eye. Meanwhile, in the mountains, Leto and Cain continue on their way. Leto, still angry, asks his master where they are going and when the spider eggs will be removed from his body. Cain, impatient, scolds him for being presumptuous in asking this question. Leto apologizes, but in his mind he curses the elf. Cain explains that they are heading west, where his army is located, and reassures Leto that the eggs will soon be removed. Leto thinks that if they are heading west, they must be on their way to a battlefield. He begins to doubt Cain, suspecting that the elf is just using him, and when he no longer needs him, will kill him. After all, Cain is a wretched elf. Leto thinks about stabbing him right there, imagining that if he hits his neck, he should die. But suddenly, in his mind, Leto sees himself split in half. It was only his imagination. He decides it's not the right time to act and whispers that one day he will kill him. Cain, with his keen hearing, hears the whisper and asks, "What did you say?" Leto, frightened, replies that he was just cold and thinks that this damned elf's ears are incredibly good. Later, we see Leto running, exhausted, while mentally cursing Cain for his insensitivity. He shouts for his master to walk more slowly and apologizes, saying he has no other way. Cain, without showing any sign of fatigue, simply replies that there are probably more assassins lurking around, and that if Leto wants to survive, this is the only way to go. Leto wonders how Cain never gets tired, and suddenly Cain lets out a psychotic laugh. Leto, suspicious, thinks that the elf is planning to run away, laughing so loudly and doesn't understand why. Suddenly, Cain does a somersault, which leaves Leto even more confused. Cain then says it's time to get some rest. At this point, we see a flashback to the confrontation between Cain and the stiletto assassin. The eyes of Cain's armor saw the assassin before he could react, and his head was easily lopped off. However, the assassin's weapon brushed against Cain's neck, causing a small cut. Back in the present, Cain realizes that the assassin's gun was poisoned. He admits that he had forgotten about it, as it has been a long time since he fought on a battlefield. The poison was strong, but Cain says that if he were human like Leto, he would have died by now. The poison, although powerful, is partly blocked by his armor, and with some rest, he will be fine. Leto, frustrated, thinks that he wishes the poison had killed Cain, but remains silent. Cain puts his foot in Leto's face, ordering them to continue on their way. Leto then asks his master why he was being chased by an assassin from the same group. Cain once again rebukes him for being presumptuous and says he's going to rest until he recovers from the poison. He comments that he never thought he'd have to sleep in a hole like that since the war. Leto, incredulous, thinks about running away while Cain sleeps, but the elf warns him that without help, the spider eggs inside him will kill him. Cain claims that all the useful humans have already died, but he knows someone who can save him. What's more, Leto knows that if he tries to run, Cain will kill him without a second thought. Upon hearing this, Leto trembles with fear. Then Cain burrows into a hole and silence takes over. Leto calls out, "Master, are you there?" But Cain doesn't answer. Frustrated, Leto curses him again, thinking that this could be his best chance of escape. However, he soon realizes that even if he managed to escape from Cain, the people from the prince's castle would be after him too. To make matters worse, assassins are after Cain. Staying close to him seems to be the best way to protect himself. Plus, Cain can remove the spider eggs from inside him. Assuming that Leto will remain by Cain's side, he reflects on the problems that lie ahead. His plan is to follow Cain until the spider eggs are removed, and once free of them, look for an opportunity to escape. After that, he intends to increase his own power in order to find his brother and strengthen himself to avenge his parents. Leto knows that his brother has been sold to a place called Surin. Looking at his hand, he thinks of his right arm, which is now a giant fork. That's the only monstrous part he currently possesses. He wonders if, by removing the eggs, he might lose this fork arm. As he contemplates this, a glow appears between the parts of the fork. Leto lies down to dodge and notices an arrow sticking in a nearby tree. He wonders where the arrow came from, and looking up the hill, sees an elf and a folk arguing. The folk asks the other if he's sure there are humans there. The other elf replies that he has heard rumors that a human has stuck a fork in Prince Romero's eye and is now being sought. Volk gets excited, saying that if they manage to capture this human, they'll earn at least 50 silver, which would be enough to cover the entire month's hunts. They prepare for the hunt, and Leto starts to panic, running. The Volk confirms that there really is a human there, and the other elf prepares her bow, shooting a curved arrow in Leto's direction. He manages to defend himself with his fork arm, but the Volk, watching, comments that Leto is a blinker, a fan of Orochino, joking that he was bitten by the female blinker spiders. He says that they can't capture him alive, and that they need to kill him before the mutation occurs. Meanwhile, the archer is impressed, thinking that it was just a coincidence that Leto managed to repel the arrow. Leto, nervous, realizes that if he continues like this, he will be captured. When the next arrow is fired, he ducks and dodges again, leaving the archer even more impressed with his skills. The other folk, however, arms himself with an axe, and as he prepares to kick Leto, ends up throwing him down the hill. Leto rolls through the snow and trees, luckily not hitting his head on anything. While he's recovering, another arrow comes towards him, and as luck would have it, gets stuck between his legs. But at that moment, the axe was already in his face. The Volk attacks, trying to cut off Leto's head, but he dodges, ducking. In response, he sticks his giant fork into the Volk's leg, making him scream in pain and spurt blood. The Volk, enraged, takes aim at Leto, who gets up and regains his balance with his fork. Leto thinks that Cain had promised him that he would be safe by his side, but now he drifts off to sleep. Suddenly, Leto feels an arrow sticking in his neck. He falls slowly, his vision blurring, but he gets up again, determined, holding his fork and shouting that he won't die. He has to survive until he finds his brother. At that moment, horns begin to grow on his head and his eyes turn completely green. The mutation advances in his body and he shouts fiercely that he won't die. The folk with the axe is impressed, but Leto is hit by another arrow in the neck and this time he falls. The archer asks if he's finally dead. The Volk, realizing that Leto is a blinker, says that the arrow barely penetrated his skin and that he has to finish him off by cutting off his head with the axe. He raises the axe, cursing the human race, when just before he kills him he hears a whisper. It sounds like a woman's voice, commenting on how incredible everything is. A face appears from the shadows, admiring the scene. The Volks become alert and the archer asks who is there. The enigmatic presence continues to whisper in the corner. The archer warns them that if they don't leave, she will shoot them. The Volk with the axe suggests that it could be a nobleman, but the archer replies that a nobleman would never come to a place like that, a forest inhabited by predators and prey. She fires an arrow in the direction of the shadow, but the arrow disappears into the shadows. She wonders if she's hit something. Just then, another shadow moves behind them. The archer, hearing a scream, turns around and realizes that her friend is no longer there. The face of the shadows looks at her, smiling, and says that the hunter has now become the prey. When the archer notices the shadow, it's too late. Meanwhile, Leto is remembering his past. Images of dead yellow humans flash through his mind, with green folks taking them as slaves. He sees a green folk dragging his mother, who in an act of desperation manages to claw it free. She runs for her life, but is soon caught by a bloody blue elf. Leto wakes up, screaming his mother's name. Suddenly he smells something familiar. It's Sandon, the Cerberus from the castle. Leto asks if it's really him, and it seems that Sandon is happy to see him, licking his face. Leto is also happy to hear that Sandon has managed to escape, but then he remembers what was going on and asks where the Volks are. Looking around, he sees the Volks dead, with Sandon's claws in them. Leto wonders if it was Sandon who did it. On the face of Cerberus, the twisted faces of the Volks begin to repeat Leto's words. The first head says, "As of today, your name is Sandon." The scene is both shocking and frightening. Leto is intrigued and a little frightened by the repetition of his own voice. Suddenly, he notices that the wound on his neck, where he was hit by the arrow, has completely healed. "That's the power of the spider," says Sandon, impressed, but repeating Leto's words again. He looks like a kind of bumblebee, who communicates only through the phrases he hears. Leto then tells Sandon that he can come with him, as Cerberus has nowhere else to go. In addition, someone peculiar is accompanying them, Cain. Cain appears, commenting on the peculiarity of a Cerberus following a human. Leto thinks that Cain will only show up after everything has been sorted out. He starts to explain himself, saying that he didn't try to run away from his master, master, but Kane reassures him that he already knows. Kane reveals that the dead Volks were human hunters who specialized in turning them into slaves for sale, and that it's amazing that Leto survived. Leto notices that Cerberus becomes cautious in Kane's presence and starts growling. However, by looking into Sandon's eyes, Kane provokes a deep fear, causing Cerberus to shrink and turn into a puppy again. Leto asks what's going on, and Kane explains that this is a Cerberus instinct. When it encounters a stronger opponent, it shrinks as a symbol of submission. Leto reflects on how even a Cerberus doesn't understand hierarchy. Kane advises Leto to keep this in mind, as it also applies to humans. Kane says goodbye and tells Leto to continue with Sandon, as he will be useful. As they walk, the day begins to dawn, and Leto reflects on his escape. To escape from Kane, he needs to get to know him better. He asks Kane if he hates sunlight. Kane asks why, and Leto explains that he has heard that the nobles start their activities when the sun goes down. He also mentions that it was at this time that his mother was attacked. Kane replies that this is just a legend created by humans who hate them. He admits that most elves don't really like sunlight, but that he personally appreciates it. Kane mentions that complete darkness doesn't suit the world, and that in hell there are always red flames of burning sulfur. Leto, in a joking moment, makes an obscene gesture towards Kane. At that moment, Kane bends down and asks Leto to do the same. Leto wonders what's going on, and Kane, watching the horizon, points to a guard post. They can pass, but they need to find a shortcut. Leto suggests that they should go there and destroy everything, but Kane explains that as soon as they are seen by the soldiers, they will use a marker. Leto doesn't know what it means, and Kane explains that it's an arrow tied to a whistle. When fired, it makes a specific sound that alerts the soldiers and assassins. Kane warns them that they are too far away to turn back, and Leto wonders what is strange about his gaze. Meanwhile, on the side of the tower, cries for help echo. The guards from above ask who is there, thinking it's a human. Leto, approaching, tries to disguise himself, claiming that he is a slave who has run away and is lost. One of the Volks doesn't quite believe it, but the other thinks that if they deliver Leto back to the castle, they might get some meat. They comment that they'll soon be changing shifts, so it's worth a try. The other Volk says he'll open the gate for Leto, who now looks completely different, even with his haircut. He smiles, relieved that his plan has worked. Then, going back a bit, Kane says he has a plan. If Leto says he's a slave of the castle, the people at the post won't kill him, so he takes advantage of this to get close to them. Kane doesn't care if he kills the guys or not, he just wants them not to fire that warning. But then Leto says that they'll definitely shoot him with that forkhand. Kane replies that he just has to turn back. Leto has no idea how, but Kane says he's the one who should know, because he's seen lots of Winkers do it. Leto pushes and says it's not working. Then Kane simply tries to cut his head off. Leto dodges and wonders why he's doing it. The dog starts barking at him, but after a stare down, Cerberus becomes shy and quiet. Kane comments that his hair is a mess and says he's going to start cutting it. While he's cutting his hair, he warns him that if Leto's arm doesn't return to normal, he'll cut his arm off with it. So he starts cutting, making a lock of Leto's hair. Then he starts to make lots and lots of cuts. Meanwhile, Leto is desperate, trying to get his arm back to normal. He thinks this madman is going to end up killing him and keeps repeating, damn it, switch, switch, switch. After several cuts, Kane says he's ready and that now it's time for the arm. Leto shouts that it's fine, calm down, because he's finished there too. Leto thinks again that this bastard is a bastard, and Kane comments that it seems someone has understood what it's like. It doesn't matter if it's a human or an elf, they both grow up in a desperate situation. Meanwhile, Leto runs his hand through his hair and thinks that one day he's going to kill that bastard. At that moment, he was already in the guard tower, and the Volk asked him how a slave got out of the castle. Leto replies that he ran out of there and also says that there was work going on in the castle, so he fell into the river and ran away. The Volk asks if that's really what happened, and Leto says yes, but he's thinking that maybe the Volk saw through the lie. But then Volk starts laughing, saying that he didn't sense any lie, and says that Leto must have been very lucky. Anyway, he has to sit there looking pretty before they change the shift and take him back to the castle. Meanwhile, Kane is still in the distance and thinks that catching that arrow without killing everyone there is going to be impossible. Only those who understand that taking the lives of others in order to survive is what must be done can survive in this world. So he's going to have to show Kane that he can do it. That's what it takes to survive in hell. He wonders if Leto has the necessary qualifications to become a demon. Meanwhile, Leto finds that arrow, which has a whistle stuck on it. He thinks he has to get it somehow, but concludes that there's no other way but to fight them. The only chance he has of breaking the arrow is to kill the Volks, but he wonders if he can really do it. He's never killed anyone, but he thinks he can't hesitate like this. He has to kill them all at once. instantly. Meanwhile, the folks were talking, and one of them said he had a 12-month-old daughter. He says that when he saw that baby being born, he thought that his life hadn't been a waste. At that moment, Leto retracts his claws, but the other says that, at the end of the day, it's just another mouth to feed, and if he had known that would happen, he would have gone to the battlefield, but he still makes money by killing humans. At that moment, this guy has dug his own grave, because Leto remembers what happened to him and his mother. He can never forget killing that damned blue, that disgusting green, and that they are all enemies of humanity. They killed his family. Sticking his claws out again, he thinks that this is revenge. The other heard a scream, turned around to see, and Leto had already ripped off one of his hands and was charging at the other. The Volks can't react properly and already loses his crossbow, but returns a kick to Leto's face. Meanwhile, they both look at the crossbow. Volk jumps first to grab it, but Leto pierces his back with his fork. As he lies there on the ground, the Volk begs for mercy, saying that he has a family, that he has a daughter, and Leto just stares at him with a dark look. At that moment, at the same time, Prince Homer's bodyguard was walking around. He was running through the snowy hills until he came to a village. Seeing the first villager, he asks him if he's seen a human there, but he replies that he hasn't seen a mouse. Just then, the prince arrives with his entire army. The prince asks if the bodyguard has found anything, but he says no, but not to worry, because they'll keep looking around. Besides, that slave isn't familiar with this area either. One day he'll get lost, and then they'll catch him. The prince begins to look at this village and says that in the past, they have ridden an animal called a horse, a rare species that is difficult to obtain nowadays. It's something the prince really wants, and he can't be comfortable unless he gets what he wants. His father always said that he should get things with his own effort, so he's going to get it himself. Gouging out that slave's eyes with his bare hands, he's going to cut his body limb from limb and feed it to Cerberus. Then suddenly, a villager approaches, a villager with a baby on her lap, asking for help. This woman tells him that over time, the crops have shrunk a lot. The price of rent has doubled and there isn't enough food to get through the winter. She asks him to give her a little, or at least something to eat. Prince Homer actually asks her if she's asking for his help. He says that he will help her, that he will cut off her hand and give it to the child to eat. Maybe he can feed everyone in the village with her arm and body. The prince says that folks can gain weight very easily, even with little food, and asks her to stay still so that he can cut it up in a way that everyone can eat. Just as he was about to kill her, they hear a loud noise on the horizon, which sounds like a marking arrow. The bodyguard says it sounds like a guard post has found something, and the prince replies that that's great, they're going there now. Meanwhile, in the guard tower, Leto was shaking because he had killed people. He starts to cry a little, but then pulls himself together and says it wasn't all that. He looks at the dead folks and says it was their fault for being born folks. Then he gets up and wonders what that sound was earlier, until he comes across two people downstairs. A Volk asks who's there, and Leto hides, wondering who those guys are, until he hears moans of pain again, and when he looks up, Kane has already killed them both. Leto asks where they came from, and Kane replies that it was shift change time and that they were unlucky. Kane says that they've probably already heard the sound of the marker, so they have to get out of there very quickly. Kane calls Leto over and welcomes him to hell because he's now a little demon. Leto doesn't quite understand, but by then they're running again. A folk worker in the distance sees what is happening and wonders why they are running. Already in that snowy mountain range, they keep running, and Leto, obviously very tired, asks his master how long they still have to run. Kane tells him that just after they pass this canyon, there will be a forest, which is a good place to hide. Leto asks for a moment to rest, as he's feeling a pain in his stomach. He thinks those eggs are going to hatch. Then suddenly Kane senses something, quickly grabs Leto by the collar and pulls him along. They go down a part of the canyon and hide. Kane says that they are being chased and that they are close to them. Leto asks if they're soldiers, but Kane says no, they're murderers. Then everyone remains silent, waiting for the moment to happen. Leto looks around, doesn't seem to see anything, and tells Kane that there doesn't seem to be anything. But Kane says that it's something he feels. It's not something you can see with your eyes. It's something known as the sixth sense, an intuition. Leto didn't quite understand what it was, but Kane says that after so many years on the battlefield, he realizes many things. The battlefield has madness, a lot of fear, brutality, anger, and cold, meaningless deaths, happiness, sadness, desire, frustration, and heartbreak. After a collision of so many emotions together, at that moment comes calm, the calm that appears after everything is over. Leto thinks that Kane is talking nonsense again, but Kane says that one day Leto will learn that. After spending so much time on the battlefield, he'll be able to sense the murderous intent directed at him. Kane looked at the horizon and said that the murderer who had come to comfort his ego had already arrived. Looking ahead, there was a person. This assassin was standing on a rock with a small scythe. He makes a small cut in the water, and the water hits his mask. When the water rises completely and covers his body, he disappears. Leto is shocked to see that he has already disappeared, and Kane says that the attack is coming. The assassin was then ready behind the two of them. He makes several cuts with his scythe, but but Kane manages to dodge, holding onto the stone. The blade almost hits Leto in the face, but at that moment Kane kicks the assassin's face away. Now they both begin their battle right on the riverbank. The two are very fast and can't hit each other. Their attacks are deflected by each other's blades, the knife against the scythe. After a series of attacks, the assassin distances himself a little from Kane, and Kane says he's good, even though he only has one arm. Then, suddenly, the assassin makes a sign with his hand and a cut appears on Kane's armor. This cut slowly recovers, and Kane thinks that the power of his armor has been weakened by that damned poison. But in any case, it's been a while since he encountered a person who emanates such energy, like that assassin. Leto stands there reflecting that no matter how much he thinks about it, staying close to that asshole is the best chance he has of surviving. But there's also nothing wrong with wanting to score some points with him, is there? So he really wants to show his master the skill that easily killed those two Volks. Then he shouts to his master that he's going to help him, but Kane just tells him to shut up and says he'll kill him if he intervenes in the fight. Leto says yes and puts his fork away. He then sits down next to Kane and tells him that they'll have to sit there quietly for a while. Leto thinks that Kane will probably win this fight, but he still wants to see him get hurt a bit. So he starts rooting for the one-armed killer. Meanwhile, it looks like the two are evenly matched, exchanging frantic blows, but the assassin seems to be being pushed back. He takes advantage of this gap to enter the water, transforming himself into an aquatic voodoo, and quickly heads in Kane's direction. Kane makes a counterattack against the assassin, who moves away again and steps onto the riverbank. The Kane also makes a sign with his hand, and a cut appears on the assassin's cape, only for the assassin's cape to suddenly start regenerating. Kane thinks that his armor is also alive and wonders why an assassin would have that, but Kane says he doesn't care about that at all, because he'll get the armor alive after he kills the assassin and feed it to the Khan. He was having a lot of fun with that fight. Then, suddenly, Sandal senses something and starts growling at the mountains. Leto asks what it is, but when he looks, he sees a large army up there. He hides and thinks that the soldiers have already come this far. Then he starts shouting for his master, "Master, master, master, master." Kane then speaks to the assassin for a moment and quickly leaves the fight, going over to Leto. He grabs the boy's neck and begins to hang him, saying that he has already told him to be quiet and asks him if he wants to die. Leto, very angry and thinking of killing Kane, tells him to look upstairs because the soldiers have already arrived. Kane says that they've already made it that far, and Leto and Cerberus ask what they're going to do now because Cerberus copied Leto's phrase. Then suddenly, the assassin calls out Kane's name. The assassin says it's better to postpone the fight until another day because with soldiers, it means he won't kill Kane with his own strength. Kane is impressed by what he says, and even more so that an assassin speaks in such a cultured and honorable way. But the murderer says that Kane has committed the same sin as him, and the only way they can be forgiven is by the almighty god Albino, through death. He again cuts the water so that it rises, and disappearing into it, tells Kane to stay alive because he is going to kill Kane. Leto thinks the guy has disappeared again. There are only monstrous bastards in this place, but Kane says nothing, just stares at the scene, until a Volk upstairs tells him that he's found the two of them. The prince picks up the telescope he was using and says he can't see anything, only for the Volk to tell him he's using the wrong eye. The people stare at him, pissed off, and then the prince puts the telescope in the right eye, saying that he's finally found those slaves who gouged his eye. But who is that next to him? He realizes it's Kane and wonders why Kane is with that slave and why he's still alive. The assassins didn't do the job. Contes says that if Kane is there, they have to gather more soldiers. The prince thinks that if he goes back now, he'll be a laughing stock, but then he realizes that he has more soldiers, and on his side there are also two knights. He'll manage to kill them both, and no one will underestimate him. The prince tells them to go down, but Contes gets very nervous, because he didn't want to, but he obeys and tells the soldiers to shoot. They throw down a rope and a hook for everyone to zip down. The people say that the rope is firm, and the Volks start to descend with Contes. Kane thinks that they're coming too fast and that there must be more soldiers up there. Kane starts to run and says that the forest is nearby. Leto starts to think that he doesn't have a moment's peace. Meanwhile, to the west of the continent, in the purple sky, where it's a cursed land, where all kinds of monsters appear, this place is called the Tribal War Arena, a battlefield. Somewhere in this place, we see a Volkman meditating. A short person approaches him, asking if he's dead, but he replies that no, he's just resting. The folk says that this time was difficult. He even broke a rib. The short one says that in return, that guy's bones have turned to dust. We see that there seems to be a guy in armor inside some kind of dead symbiote. The little guy says that this winker was hard to kill, but they couldn't even find an original spider's nest. Then, all of a sudden, a little mouse comes out of all that fur. Volk is startled to see the mouse on his shoulder, but the big fella says that the mouse won't do any harm. However, he also says that he has very bad feelings about it and is worried about Kane. Volk asks what he's talking about and thinks they should go and find Kane, but he says no, that they've already sent Yara to find him, and that they have a lot of work to do. Later, in the forest beyond the canyons, Prince Homer's soldiers slowly approach. They look around, searching for something. Meanwhile, in this silence, Kane and Leto were hiding behind a tree. Kane managed to count 18 soldiers, as well as Prince Homer himself and the Count. Kane thinks the prince really is a little kid, but when he looks at a big knight in armor, he thinks he's never seen him before and that he's a bit bizarre. The soldier starts growling, but Leto tells him to be quiet. Kane says, "Hey, Fork, get ready for combat," but he wonders if they're really going to fight, thinking that there are more than 20 people there. Until Kane takes the lead, calls out to the prince and asks him how he dares to try to kill him, questioning whether his own influence is so frightening even to the prince. He is also very surprised that a coward like the prince has appeared there in the flesh. The prince simply shouts that whoever takes Kane's head will receive 1,000 pieces of silver and that they must kill him now. All the soldiers rush at him. The first soldier rushes forward recklessly and, unable to react, is pierced by the Red Knight's knife. Then several arrows try to hit him, but Kane uses the soldier as a human shield and is thirsty for another fight. People are a little shocked by this, but that big knight in armor is enraged. Meanwhile, Leto is thinking that Kane has gone off the deep end with so many people there, and he believes he can simply get rid of Kane. But no, if Kane dies, the spider eggs will hatch inside him, until he spots the prince and thinks that this is the chance he has now, the chance to avenge his mother. The prince is worried that the number of soldiers he has might not be enough to kill Kane, and he prepares himself to run if anything goes wrong. Then he sees Leto approaching. The Count tells the prince to be careful, because the boy has turned into a winker, but the prince tells him to shut up, because he's going to take care of Leto. He quickly runs towards Leto, telling him that he's just a slave and that now he's going to get a taste of the real elf king, thinking that he's going to cut Leto into little pieces. But just then, Leto pierces the prince's other eye with his fork, and at the same time a cherry is pierced in the process. At that moment, Lady Battery is also eating cherries. The prince falls to his knees in so much pain that he can't see a thing. He picks up his sword and starts swinging it around, saying he's going to kill Leto, but Leto simply asks if it hurts. The prince replies that it's not painful, but Leto says that it's nothing compared to the pain he's felt, the pain of losing his friends, family, and mother. What he's feeling now is nothing. The prince was crying because he was going to die. Just then, the Count appears to attack Leto, is hit and thrown against a tree, spitting blood. The Count asks if the prince is all right, but he says no. He's blind. His left eye, which was covered by an eye patch, hasn't recovered yet, and he needs to call the doctor. The Count says that there isn't a doctor there and they need to go back to the castle. Then he calls Sir Wester and asks him to take care of the battlefield because he's going to take the prince back. The knight just nods. The Count says that they must stay alive because if they return empty-handed, their heads will be cut off. The knight asks the two Volks near him to take care of the child before it turns. Leto was there, ready, tired, but ready. The two Volks set out to attack him, but the one who quickly protects him is Sandal, who beheads the first Volk. However, he also receives arrows from other folks. Leto didn't want to leave the situation like this, but when he tried to help Sandal, he was pushed by the Volk's shield and was about to die by his sword. But Leto manages to defend himself with his fork. The Volk says that Leto had better give up soon, because he's going to become a monster sooner or later. The sword comes closer, cutting through Leto's skin, but he shouts at the Volk to stop talking shit. He pushes so hard that the Volk's blade begins to crack. Leto then makes a new move. He starts spinning his claw like a pawn, like a blender. This completely fragments the Volk's sword, which is shocked. Taking advantage of the gap, Leto lunges forward, and without even thinking, pierces Volk's neck, killing him. Leto thinks that it doesn't matter if he becomes a monster. If he manages to kill all those bastards, nothing matters. The Volk begs for mercy, but is soon decapitated by Leto's fork. He thinks that, if necessary, he will become a monster. The Volk's head rolls off and lands near the other soldiers. One of them wonders what it is, realizing that he is now a complete monster. Leto was already at another stage of transformation. Meanwhile, one of the soldiers on the battlefield was very tired and was looking ahead, trying to see Kane. Suddenly, one of his comrades is cut in half, and without him realizing it, Kane approaches him and begins to make several cuts on his body. Without difficulty, Kane kills one more. The soldiers in the back just watch the whole thing and think that Kane has killed 4 people instantly, but he starts shouting so that no one is frightened. He just asks them to move defensively, because they can. Until that great knight picks up his weapon, a huge hammer, and says he'll take care of it. He approaches Kane and tells him that this is the famous knight with the knife. He introduces himself as Wester FF and says that he has heard several rumors about Kane. He talks about the restaurant, the most powerful knights of the Elven Kingdom, and that he is one of those 13, the most powerful. Kane smiles. Then Wester says he wants to prove whether these rumors are true or not, and challenges Kane to a duel, raising his hammer to hit him. Kane manages to dodge and takes advantage of the gap to try and attack, but is hit by the great knight's fist, which knocks him away. Soon after, he receives a series of hammer blows, one of which throws him even further. The soldiers are impressed and happy to see that he has been defeated. Meanwhile, Kane is on the ground recovering. Wester says that this is a real shame. He says that if he had been born 10 years ago and gone to war, he would undoubtedly have dealt with the Red Army, and Kane's conquests would be his. But now that the humans have fallen, there is no place for him to make a great conquest. However, that opportunity will arise if he manages to defeat Kane in this duel. Then his reputation will spread far and wide, and he says he will become a great knight. Wester the FFK, the handsomest young man who defeated the traitor Kane single-handedly. From there, his name will always be higher than Kane's. Just then he hears a laugh. Kane has another fit of laughter, and Wester asks what's so funny. Kane spits out a tooth and says, "Nice with that ugly face of yours." Then Wester puts his mask back on and goes for it. This time, in his attack, Kane disappears completely and appears behind Wester, cutting off his legs. The great knight falls to his knees, and Kane climbs onto his shoulders to stab him in the neck. Wester manages to block with his hammer, and Kane says it's fun, isn't it? While Wester thinks he's very strong, Kane says that on the battlefield, beings beyond Wester's imagination appear. It's a place where those prepared for death, regardless of their race, gather, and there are many people more powerful than him. However, Kane says that seeing an inexperienced novice like Wester talking about a subject he knows nothing about is hard not to make someone laugh. Suddenly, the eyes in Wester's armor open and begin to glow brightly. Kane's knives begin to heat up and melt Wester's hammer. Wester wonders if his hammer is melting. No weapon has ever penetrated that steel. He thinks that if Kane lets go of the sword, it will go straight into his throat, so he desperately shouts for the folks to shoot him, but they hesitate. Kane asks Wester if he doesn't want a duel. "If you were a king, interfering in a knightly duel is taboo, and you should know that since you're a knight." Wester becomes desperate and asks Kane for mercy, but Kane says that one of the reasons elves are so powerful is because of their incredible regenerative capacity. So if you want to kill a blue elf, you have to make him bleed beyond his regenerative capacity. He then says that he will now cut off both of Wester's arms. Wester screams desperately for mercy, but it doesn't do much good as both his arms are torn off at the same time. He falls face down on the ground, without any support. Kane says that the best way to kill a blue elf is by decapitation. As he calls for help, Kane rips his head off. When Wester's head is finished rolling around on the floor, Kane calls out to the Volks in the background and tells them that there are no nobles looking at them, so they can return if they value their lives. The Volks stare at each other, a little hesitant, but Kane says that this is the last chance they have. One of the folks says they have to leave. If they fight there, they'll die. They can say that, but Kane manages to escape while this platoon leaves, alive but wounded. One of the folks comments that Kane, the knight with the knife, really is a monster, just as everyone says. Another Volk agrees, saying that surely, if they had fought, they would all have died. The third says he's still getting chills down his spine. When they leave, there is silence, and Kane is alone. He thinks that his armor, Khan, has been badly hurt and weakened by that poison, and he needs to find something to feed it. Then he calls for Fork and shouts that they are leaving, but he hears nothing. He wonders if Leto has managed to escape in the midst of all this, but comes across the body of a completely drained Volk. He says that people bitten by the female blinking spider can fall into two categories: a demon, the one who absorbs the spider's power, or a monster who is consumed by the spider's power. Kane regrets that Leto fell into the second category, as he had a lot of potential. As he calls for Fork, there is Leto hanging from a tree, in a much more advanced spider mutation. When Kane spots him, Leto quickly changes tree and prepares an attack on the Knight of the Knife, but obviously Kane manages to parry the attack. Meanwhile, in Leto's mind, he is still detransformed, and it seems that, in his dream, he is cutting off Kane's leg and killing him, and he thinks it's because he was born an elf. Suddenly, he disappears and a huge red hand slaps Leto, knocking him away. He falls onto a research table and thinks he can't move. Those big yellow eyes stare at him. It seemed to be a complete demon. The demon pulls out its knife, and Leto, desperate, asks the monster to get away from him, but his arm is ripped off. He screams in pain as the demon laughs at the blood coming out of Leto's body. Slowly, the demon takes Leto's arm, and that little fork faces him and simply devours him. The demon says that this is delicious, and Leto goes into a complete state of shock. Finally, he wakes up in a completely snowy field. He is being carried by Sandal, while Kane leads the way lying on top of Sandal. Leto thinks that dream was very strange, and wonders where his arm is, as it hurts a lot. He looks ahead and sees that Kane is still alive, thinking that one day he's going to kill that asshole. Hearing some strange sounds, he wakes up again. Suddenly, he finds himself in front of a giant crab, and wonders what the hell it is, until he wakes up for good and looks around. He seems to be in a laboratory full of strange things, with skulls everywhere, equipment and maggots floating in a strange liquid. He wonders what happened and where he is, finds everything there disgusting, and wonders what all those things are. Then suddenly someone appears behind him. He is startled and falls. This person, who seems to be a blue elf, tells tells him to be careful. Leto realizes it's an elf and jumps on him, but the elf tells him that he makes very quick and ridiculous decisions. She stands behind him and plunges a needle into his neck. She says he has good reflexes, but he made the wrong decision. Leto thinks that with the needle in his neck, he can't move. The elf warns him that the next time he does something like this, he should analyze the situation first. He needs to check if there is hostility in the way. This is a simple combat execution. Leto doesn't know that. He has to find out about the enemy first. That's the use of the sixth sense. The elf with short, messy hair and a skull cap wonders why Cain has taken such a human. Leto wonders if she knows Cain. The elf says she's going to remove the needle from his neck, but he must leave very carefully, because at that moment she'll start removing his spiders, which means she's going to save his life. After a long time, he finally gets out of the giant crab and thinks that seeing that crab again wasn't a dream. He sees that Sandal is alive and runs towards him. Leto is overjoyed, and Sandal licks his face. The elf tells him that she has finished her treatment, and Cain says that he is very lucky to have survived again. He says that as he promised, he has taken the spider eggs out of him, and from now on the fork is Leto's personal shield until he dies. Leto thanks him and thinks that he really is alright now. Suddenly the elf calls Leto over to a corner and shows him a spider that was about to hatch inside him. Basically, it was in his stomach. Leto is very disgusted to see that it was inside his body. The elf says that those horns on the spider's head are also very different from an ordinary blinking spider. She asks him how big the spider was that bit him, and if he remembers it. He says he doesn't, because it was a bit dark, but it seemed to be bigger than him, maybe twice as big. The elf gets excited because a spider that size is a great discovery. She asks where the spider is, but Leto says it's in Cain's castle. The elf is upset, but Cain says that there were certainly several male spiders just like her, but Leto is special because he has an extreme regenerative capacity, so much so that his right arm is back to normal. Leto wonders about his right arm and then remembers what happened. It wasn't a dream. Cain tore off his arm to feed his armor. Cain says it was one of the best meals Khan has ever had, and he's trying to taste it again. He tells Leto that, from now on, his right arm will be Khan's emergency food. Leto thinks that he's going to die very quickly if he stays by this asshole's side, and that he needs to run from him at the first opportunity. Now, in Leto's head, he thinks that just after Cain said that thing about his right arm being emergency food, he bit off 2 of his fingers and gave them to the armor to eat, because he wanted to put Leto's regenerative abilities to the test. He thinks that one day he's going to kill this bastard in the most agonizing way possible, but he also thinks it's really surprising, because in less than an hour, his fingers have completely restored themselves. As soon as the fingers on his right hand had recovered, Cain wanted to test his left arm as well, but if it hadn't been for the witch telling him that it's the right arm that has power, his left arm would have been cut off too. And it's explained that her name is Corn, and she said she was a witch. Leto wasn't even sure witches existed, as he'd only heard rumors about her. A little later in that same place, Corn was listening to the story and was impressed to learn that there was an assassin in living armor. Sim said yes, only his armor wasn't on the same level as Khan's, but it was certainly living armor. Corn commented that to have armor like that, you had to have a great witch by your side. There was no way that the great witches would give a living armor qualification to a mere assassin. Then Leto asks about the living armor, and Corn says that's exactly what it is. The armors are literally alive. She explains that when someone wears this living armor, they share the mind and body of the wearer, mutually increasing their energy. The armor adapts to the wearer's personality and changes accordingly, displaying various functions and getting stronger together. Corn says that this is the ultimate creation. A witch can only create living armor once in her life, and it was even she who created Khan. Leto is furious that Charon has cut off his arm, but anyway, Corn says she's never heard of an assassin wearing living armor. She also doesn't have the same ability to gather information as before, not least because she was expelled from the Witches' Council. CM says it's because she was so bad, but Corn argues that it's not true. She snuck into the meeting of the Great Witches and was expelled. She starts crying, telling them not to mention it. The search for knowledge is what makes a witch. While she weeps, Cain begins to reflect on that murderer. He remembers the words of the man who committed the same sin as him. Cain thinks that there is something going on under the surface that he doesn't quite know what it is, perhaps because he has fought for so long on the battlefield. He says he'll find out in time and says goodbye to Corn. She asks if Cain is really going to kill Prince Homer, not least because he may soon become king. Even so, Cain thinks he'll just sit back and wait. Cain plans to fight the king too. Sim says he's going to gather his army, rip Homer's head off and kill anyone who stands in his way, even if it is the king. Corn comments that this is typical of him. Cain calls Fork to go with him, but he tells him something very important. He needs to find his brother. They were both captured as slaves, but he was sold somewhere different from his brother. He gets down on his knees and asks them to please save his brother. He won't run away and is willing to give his right arm as food to Khan as much as she wants. Cain stares at him for a while, but he tells him that they are going east. In the end, Leto gets very angry because he needs to find his brother and thinks that he may not have another chance to find him. He says he'll kill Kane if he has to. Kane also prepares his knife and asks if he's going to attack him, saying that if Leto takes another step, he'll die. They stare at each other for a while, creating a moment of tension. But just out of the blue, Korn says there's going to be a masked ball. She says she's heard that the masquerade ball will be held at Sioran Castle, and it's the ball that takes place every year. It takes place over 2 days, and Korn mentions that Kane always goes before going to the battlefield. Leto thinks it's a silly thing she said, but maybe, hey, Kane will consider this request. He tells Leto that they'll stop by Sioran Castle before heading west, and when they get there, he can look for his brother. Leto thanks his master, but in his head, he thinks he wants Kane to be damned. Kane says that, before they leave, Korn will get Leto some more clothes because he can't go to a ball like that. She smiles and says she owes him, so she'll do it. Then she glances at Sandal and asks if he wants a dress too. He doesn't understand. A few moments later, Korn tells Kane that everything is ready, and now he's wearing a much nicer outfit with a fork symbol on it. Kane comments that the protagonist looks much more presentable now and says they're going to the ball. Leto agrees, but he doesn't think he's going to that damned ball. He wants to look for his brother. That same night in Sioran, north of Camp's castle, there are poor working villagers suffering from hunger in that place. A child was being examined by a Volk. They were enslaved children, of course. Then the Volk says he'll pay for these slaves. After the guy pays, the hunter asks if that's all the money, and he replies that hunters are very undervalued these days because it's hard to get a child like that. That's all he's paying. But the Volk says it's not his fault or the aristocrats. It's to prevent elven blood from mixing with human. That's why they only accept children. The Volk says that if they keep bringing children, they'll keep selling them there, because there are only child slaves in Sioran Castle. The hunter then asks them to pay more. The man says he'll pay more next time, and the hunters stare at each other. He then agrees. But meanwhile, inside Sioran Castle, a nobleman is sipping a glass of wine and says that the current situation is very bad, as the ball will start in just 2 days. Then someone calls out to him, Count Pilar, and informs him that his mask for the ball is ready as he requested. The mask is studded with various crystals and precious stones. Pilar says it looks great. He'll be the star of the ball, and this time, Kane will be overshadowed by his beauty. Early in the morning on the day of the ball, we see Count Pilar looking out of the window at the guests entering. Then his sister appears before him. He calls her Tyrell, and she is wearing a very beautiful dress for the ball. Tyrell asks why there are so many aristocrats there, and Pilar replies that she doesn't know for sure, but perhaps her reputation has grown again. She says that these people are coming to a ball while people are dying in the war. Pilar looks closely and notices that there is dirt on her. He asks her where she's gone outside the castle again and advises her that when she sees a poor person, at least share some food. But she replies that her brother doesn't understand how contradictory this world is. While they are bathed in luxury, there are people outside the castle nearby, dying of hunger. Everyone wears superficial masks in this life, and if no one understands each other, this world will never change. Pilar just stares at her, saying nothing, and she asks if Kane is going to show up. The Earl says maybe, because the last time he was seen was at Camp's castle. Tyrell is excited by this, and calls her servant to go along and welcome the guests, in the hope of seeing Kane arrive. Suddenly, someone accidentally bumps into Tyrell, who gets angry. The person who knocked her down apologizes, but when she touches her, Tyrell feels disgusted. She picks up a glove and starts hitting the person, saying how dare they show such an ugly face around her, and that she will never forgive something so ugly. While the person asks for forgiveness, she doesn't stop hitting. Pilar thinks her sister is crazy, and she turns around very angry, saying that blood has splashed on her dress because of him. The person can do nothing but cry on the floor, and Tyrell says he'll get a new dress now, clean of blood. Meanwhile, at the ball, several people had already gathered. The music was playing, and the waiters who were serving the ball were pissed off at having to work late at night just because these rich people wanted to dance. Then the host appears and draws everyone's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, summoning the greatest sons and daughters of the albino god, the pillars and foundation of the great king, in Elven. Duke Pilar appears in front of everyone with his mask studded with very shiny crystals and says that this night will be remembered forever. Everyone is impressed by his mask. Someone notices a guy in a Spider-Man mask, and the guests comment that his mask is fantastic. They say that of course it befits the Duke. He thinks that, as expected, all eyes are on him. At that moment, it doesn't matter if Kane shows up at this party, he'll be the main character. Meanwhile, Tyrell continues looking for Kane. Outside, the Volks are guarding the place, and one of the Volks comments that he smells meat and hopes there's something left for them. The other guard tells him not to dream, because these people don't care about them, and that they'll have to eat more barley pots. Suddenly, someone appears and they become more attentive. One of the people tells them they can't go in, but the next moment they're both dead. Cain tells Leto to find his brother, but if he doesn't show up before the dance is over, Leto replies that he already knows. He warns that if Cain tries to run away, he will die. Both Leto and Sandal go to fetch his brother, and Cain was already preparing to enter the ball. Leto thinks that the first place he'll look is the underground, usually where the slaves stay, and prays to his brother that he will please survive, because now he's here to rescue him. Meanwhile, Terrell keeps looking for Cain and wonders if he'll turn up. It's almost time to dance, and he still hasn't shown up. She thinks she misses him and wants to dance with him again. She makes a face that's supposed to look sexy, but she's really weirded out, thinking she wants to feel him again. People start whispering about it, talking about Lady Terrell, until everyone's attention turns elsewhere. And Pilar realizes that everyone has turned their attention away from him. This means only one thing: Cain has appeared at the ball. He was there, without a mask, and wearing nothing but armor. Everyone is amazed that Cain, the Knight of the Knife, is there. Everyone talks about him and the rumors that he's a war hero, but Pilar asks what the meaning of that is. This is his castle, and he told them to come in formal clothes and a mask. It's not a war. Cain giggles and begins to tear his face out of his living armor, standing naked in front of everyone. Tyrell is embarrassed to see the mask on his face. As she approaches him, a black energy covers Cain's entire body, turning it into a real show. The black restraints wrap around his body as if they were fabric, and when he is almost completely covered, he says that it's been a long time since he's seen Lady Tyrell. She gets all nervous in his presence, and he kneels in front of her, asking them to dance together. Meanwhile, underground, Leto is shouting to Sandal that if he finds any humans, he'd better can them. They run down there, and Leto wonders where Waven is. Did they kill him just because he was blind? He doesn't think so. Waven must be alive somewhere, until he sees a room where there are several dead people without skin, which makes him so nauseous that he stops to vomit. He wonders why these people are like this, and if his brother is among them. Sandal looks down the corridor and starts barking at something. A hooded person holding a torch approaches. This person says that Leto's skin is very good for taking off, especially for making masks for a ball. The younger the person, the softer the skin. The person is wearing a mask and comments that his skin is perfect for this. Behind the hooded man, there is a large creature that appears to be a cyclops, and he tells the cyclops that he can eat all of that child's flesh, but he can't damage the skin. The creature was thirsty for meat. Meanwhile, at the ball, while the music was going and everyone was dancing, Cain, of course, was always on the lookout. He thinks the guests aren't that interested in the ball. Terrell comments that it's nice, isn't it? Several aristocrats have turned up this year, and she says that since he's returned, that means the war is over, doesn't it? Cain replies that no, there are still some humans in hiding. Besides, there's a reason why he's come back. Tyrell thinks that maybe it's because he missed her, but he chuckles and says it's to kill Prince Romero. She's shocked by this and asks if it's a joke, but he says he's not making a joke. He'll cut down anyone who stands in his way. Tyrell says that he will always stand by Cain. Meanwhile, Pilar is dancing and accidentally squeezes the woman's hand too hard, who gets angry and goes to find another partner to dance with. But Pilar isn't worried about this at all. He's very angry with Cain, wondering why everyone has lost their focus on him to concentrate on that damned man. He feels a lot of hatred for Cain and realizes that no one is focusing on the ball he organized. Everyone is silently looking at Cain. But that spotlight should be on him, the Count, and he will never forgive Cain. While the music was playing, Tyrell was completely immersed in dancing with Cain, who despite being a warrior seemed very skilled at dancing. She loses herself, imagining the universe with him. At that moment, she joins him as one. After the song ends, everyone is focused on them, and the beautiful dance move impresses everyone, who is speechless. Then they start applauding this demonstration. Cain is staring at Tyrell now, without his mask, and she is very embarrassed, flushed by the sensation she has just felt. With her lips, perhaps she could reach his, until an interruption occurs at the ball. Everyone is shocked, and several blue elf guards enter the venue, among them Count Pilar. One of the guests comments that it's very rude to enter a ball with weapons and armor, but Pilar tells him to shut up and says that the ball is over. He orders everyone to pay attention, and says that yesterday an official communique arrived from the Reign. He tells the messenger to read the contents, which say that a knight's oath is a promise to defend the kingdom and protect the king. Breaking this oath is a serious offense, as it is tantamount to betraying the king and the god Albino. The knight Cain Bolson, for the crime of murdering the king, is to be sentenced to death. Tyrell is shocked to hear this and tells her brother the Earl that this is absurd. People begin to take off their masks, questioning since when the king is dead. Some say they need to go to the capital to check, but Count Pilar insists that the king is dead. Of the knights who were on the battlefield, Cain was the only one to return, and it becomes obvious that it was he who. Cain thinks that's why he was called back to the kingdom. The plan was to kill the king and put the blame on him, and from the way Duke Pilar is talking, it seems that the king has indeed been killed. Cain wonders why Homer did all this for a kingdom that he would inherit one day anyway. He thinks that this plan is sloppy anyway. Cain thinks that not all the elves will believe it. After all, it wasn't him who asserted elven superiority, apart from all the other knights. People obviously weren't buying it. How could the great hero Cain do such a thing? The Count says that there must be a reason for every action he takes and that, from now on, he will reveal the great secret of the Knight Cain. He pulls out a scroll and says that recent research by witches has revealed that Cain was born mixed with human blood. He's a half-breed, and they say he's just a human disguised as an elf. Cain, hearing this, becomes completely possessed. Count Pilar, who set the whole thing up, thinks that now is the time for Cain to pay for all the humiliation he has put Pilar through, and today, this ball will become his tomb. He orders his assassins to kill him, and among the people at the ball, there are disguised assassins who take off their cloaks and go after Cain. He thinks he expected this, and it looks like he'll have to ask later what kind of baseless information the Count told him. Maybe it's time to have some fun. Downstairs, everything was shaking. The big Cyclops prepares to hit Leto, who manages to dodge quickly, but is soon grabbed by the face and thrown into the wall. He seems to fall a little weakly, and the hooded person says that Leto is a blinker, isn't he? He was surprised that he only had his arm transformed. We see that Cyclops has been injured in the arm by the fork, and the hooded person says that he has heard that blinkers are very powerful, even among monsters. What's more, it seems that Leto hasn't completely transformed. The masked man says that Leto won't stand a chance against his Cyclops anyway. Cyclopses are used in armies to break up enemy formations, and he has tamed this Cyclops since it was small. The Cyclops doesn't care about appearance, it looks inside. He wonders if Leto is listening, that there are people who only judge by appearance in this world. But meanwhile, Leto isn't even listening. He's thinking that this Cyclops has tremendous speed for his size. His fork barely penetrates the Cyclops' skin, and Leto thinks he doesn't know how he's going to do it. But if he manages to transform completely, like last time, he remembers Korn telling him not to trust the spider's power completely. She said she'd heard that he'd turned completely into a blinker, and it was thanks to Cain that he'd managed to stay sane. But if he turns into a complete blinker again, he'll lose his sanity completely, and if he turns into a complete monster, he'll never be able to come back. He thinks he has to do something because at this rate, he's going to die before he finds his brother. First, he has to think about everything around him: terrain, relief, the enemy's characteristics. Then he looks at Cerberus and thinks that there must be a way. He remembers Korn also saying that his Cerberus seems to be very talented, so he should train him well. Leto thinks about the Cerberus. They have the ability to adjust their bodies, becoming bigger or smaller according to the situation. It doesn't change with the will. It takes a lot of training, but they can also imitate sounds that they have heard directly. He has an even more incredible ability, the ability to read the thoughts of people nearby and imitate those thoughts in the form of sound. One day, when Cain was in the shower, Leto thought that the bastard was too relaxed, and Cerberus said exactly that in Leto's voice. Cain turned around when he heard this, and Leto told the Cerberus to shut up, saying that he was hungry. But it didn't do much good because he said that day, his right arm became food. He mentally tells Sandal that, when the time is right, he will send the signal. At that moment, the ogre lunges at them. Leto manages to dodge and uses the fork on the ogre's leg, but the fork doesn't even penetrate the monster's skin. He then gives the signal to Sandal, who goes up in a place where the ogre's guard is down, but he's about to strike Sandal. At that moment, Leto shouts Cain's name. In fact, he says, "Damned bastard." At this point, Sandal understands that he was talking about Cain, so he gets tiny and dodges the ogre, running backwards down the corridor. Leto thinks it worked. Whenever he says "damned bastard," Sandal understands that he's talking about Cain, so he gets tiny. Sandal goes after that masked, hooded guy, and wonders if he was the target all along. The masked man uses his torch to hit Sandal, but Cerberus seizes the moment and grabs the torch that was in his hand, running off with it. The hooded man is shocked by this, and thinks that it went completely dark as soon as he lost his torch. Now that he notices Leto has put out all the torches in the corridor, the hooded man says that Leto must have noticed that the Cyclops has bad eyesight. Leto thinks he already knew that Cyclops was blind, because his brother is blind too. He could only tell by the color of the ogre's eyes. He's not completely blind, just like his brother, but the opaque color of that eye doesn't fool anyone either. Leto thinks that this is his chance, because the ogre isn't seeing anything, but the hooded man tells the ogre to attack on his right, at which point he obeys, slamming Leto into the wall. Leto is then thrown far down the corridor. The hooded man says that Leto is an idiot because even if he can't see, the hooded man who owns him can still see and can command him as he pleases, not least because he raised him from childhood. So the ogre obeys, and Leto thinks he may have broken a rib in that attack. It hurts, but he's still prepared. He needs to find his brother's location, so he has to go through the corridor. The masked man realizes that Leto wants to pass him, and thinks that this was Leto's strategy, to distract the Cyclops and make Cerberus attack him. Then he thinks that Leto thinks the Cyclops is going to fall, and if he falls, he will fall too, so he just has to stay close to the Cyclops at all times. But that's exactly what Leto wanted, and he tells Sandal to use the mime. At this point, Cerberus shouts the same line as the hooded man so that Cyclops attacks to his right. When the hooded man realizes realizes that his own voice has been replicated, it's too late, because Cyclops attacks to the right, where the hooded man was, who is hit full on. As his head flies off, we see a head flying off at the masked ball. Cain had already killed one, and other assassins went after him, dying in the same way. With great speed, he dodges the attacks and impales each of the assassins. The guests were shocked by what was happening there, and the Count was there restraining his sister so that she wouldn't go near Cain. She didn't want to believe that he had killed the king, but earlier he had said that he wanted to kill the prince, which put a flea behind her ear. One of the assassins, seeing all the others dead, signals to another assassin standing next to him. Then all the assassins who were still standing throw harpoons at Cain, which catch in his armor. The harpoons catch, and the assassins circle around Cain, pulling hard in order to immobilize him. In the meantime, an assassin approaches him while his guard is down, but just as he attacks, Cain grabs his sword with his teeth, and biting down hard, breaks the blade in half, stabbing the assassin in the back. However, that wasn't the only murderer who attacked. At that moment, Cain tries to defend himself, but the assassin with the harpoon stuck in his arm pulls hard, taking Cain's knife with him and completely opening his guard, causing him to be hit in both the chest and the back. Tyrell cries when she sees this, worried about Cain, but soon after this attack, he cuts off the heads of 2 assassins and thinks that he has certainly been poisoned. At that moment, Count Pilar asks his guard for the spear and thinks that this weapon is specially made of Tiban steel. He throws the spear towards Cain, who has time to see it coming, but not enough to defend himself. The spear takes a chunk out of the shoulder guard of his armor, but Pilar complains to Tyrell, saying that the only reason the spear didn't hit Cain in the head was because she deflected it with a kick. She apologizes, but she's not sorry, because just as she's about to be arrested by the guards, she kicks one of them in the chin, rips off part of her dress and runs off in Cain's direction. The assassin who was holding the harpoon sees her approaching, but nevertheless kicks her in the neck. She stands behind Cain and asks everyone to stop it. Of course, Pilar shouts for her to leave, but she says she won't, and the Count tells her that even though she belongs to his family, if she messes with Cain, she could be executed. She starts to say that this is surely a misunderstanding. Cain would never kill the king, until he leans on her and whispers in her ear that everything is fine with him. She's embarrassed, but at that moment he pierces her with his blade and tells her she'd better stop ruining his fun. She falls hard to the ground, and Pilar screams for her sister, ordering the knights to kill Cain at once. Cain thinks he's trapped there with 2 knights equipped with T-bond steel coming towards him, while he has 2 poisons in his body. It's dangerous, but that's exactly what he wants. Danger, a feeling he hasn't felt for a long time, the tension that only comes from crossing that line. He's walking a tightrope between life and death, but he can't die here. He calls for his Karen armor and asks for a little strength. Karen asks how much he should release, and Cain says that, for now, just 1 seal is enough. It will be exciting and enjoyable enough. While all this is going on, the corridor is destroyed. Cyclops is out of control and Sandal is lying on the ground. Without command, Cyclops goes berserk, slamming into the wall. Just then, Leto appears and penetrates his neck. He thinks that this time he's managed to get his fork in deep, and tells the creature to die at once. He begins to use the spinning attack to penetrate Cyclops' neck, but Cyclops doesn't stop. He strikes back at Leto, but with all his strength left, he keeps spinning that fork until, finally Cyclops' blood is seen and he falls, defeated and dead. Leto runs out of strength, almost faints, but the hope of finding his brother wakes him up. He comes across the hooded man trying to escape. The hooded man thinks that his face hurts too much and that he needs to put his mask on, but just as he puts it on, he is pierced by Leto's fork. He asks where his brother is, and the hooded man replies that his brother was sold 3 months ago, is 12 years old and is called Avon. The hooded man says he doesn't know, because there are many human slaves around and he would never remember them all. But Leto tries even harder to torture him and says that his brother is blind and can't see anything. So if the hooded man doesn't want to die there, he should think about it a little more. The hooded man replies that a slave like that has never been there. If he had, he would have noticed all the slaves in this castle who pass by, but he has never seen this boy. Leto tells him not to lie because he's heard that his brother has been sold here. The hooded man says he's not lying. Perhaps the people who were taking the slaves were ambushed by other humans, because, as the hooded man explains, occasionally some humans attack the slave sellers and recover these people. He says that perhaps Leto's brother is with them, safe at the moment, and he was begging for mercy so that Leto would come out of there alive. He shows his skin color. He's also a yellow human. Leto asks why. Since he is human, he does this kind of thing to other humans. He replies that it's because humans don't treat him like a human. Since he was born with the mixed blood of a Volk, he was tortured, had his ears and nose ripped off, and begins to tell his story. But Leto simply leaves him to die there, saying he's not interested in his story. He grabs Sandal and tells him that, from now on, they're going to run away from that damned bastard Cain and go after his brother. All that was left of that half-breed man was his mask, broken in half. At that moment back at the ball, the Count was asking for someone to save him. On his tail was Cain, who had already killed the other 2 guards. Kane tells Pilar that if she answers his questions, she will spare his life. Kane can feel Pilar's heartbeat through his blade, and if Pilar tells a lie, Kane will know from his heartbeat. Pilar asks what Kane wants to know so much about, and Kane asks what he said about Chim having human blood. Pilar says it wasn't an invention, it's true. Kane asks again why it's true. Pilar explains that the witches, in order to keep the elven race pure, did a lot of research to distinguish metabolisms and discovered that the skin of a half-breed appears with patches of the skin of the other race. But this time, they also discovered that hair color and eye color can also match this, and that's exactly what Kane has, yellow hair and eyes. Pilar starts shouting, saying that he's not a pure elf. He has mixed blood with humans. He says that with this news, everyone is going to try to kill him. Knights, witches, aristocrats. Everyone is going to come after him. He's finished. And in the end, Pilar will be the main character in this story. But at that moment, he's cut in half by Kane. I think this guy has anime protagonist syndrome, don't you? I mean, he did, didn't he? Because he's dead. Kane just stares at his body in disgust. Meanwhile, Terrell, unconscious, was imagining herself back in the universe with Kane, trying to join him, to kiss him, until she came across her brother's face being torn in half. His last words were Kane's name. After that, she wakes up. The servants ask if she's all right, and she asks how long she's been unconscious. The one-armed knight tells her that she was asleep for a day. She asks about her brother, but he replies that Count Pilar is dead, and that Kane was the one who won the fight. The Earl's funeral was to take place the following night, and this, of course, makes Tyrell very sad. At the funeral, it is said that when the yellow-skinned humans die, they become Volk in the next life, and when the folks die, they are reborn as blue-skinned elves. When the blue-skinned elves finally die, they are reborn as angels of the white light. The priest who is performing the ceremony is the one saying this, and it is also said that these white angels rest next to the albino white god. The ceremony continues with everyone there, watching. Afterwards, Terrell in front of the mirror says that for his brother, the only real family he's ever had, despite having a horrible hobby, he's never stopped caring for her. So, for his sake, she's going to find Kane and get her revenge. She puts on a tight little outfit and says she's going to make him fall in love with her and never let him out of her heart. Meanwhile, Kane, now alone, reflected. He remembered the words that said he wasn't a pure elf. He had mixed blood with humans, and that one day everyone would come after him. This caused him to have another of those psychopathic fits of laughter. After laughing a lot, he takes a deep breath and thinks that, just when he thought things would get boring, this comes along. He's going to sort it all out, but first he has to find that damn fork. He thinks about how he dared to run away from him. He's going to kill him now. Meanwhile, Leto has gone on a journey with Sandal. He thinks that Kane must be very angry with him right now. But he says that one day he'll be as strong as him and he'll kill him. He just has to wait, because one day he will kill him. Leto thinks that, from now on, he's going to look for his brother. Since he's been moved from Castle Camps to Castle Suren, he's going back there to look for traces. He just has to be careful not to be seen by the Volks. But he also thinks that depending on the Volk, he can kill him. But he remembers that person he killed who said he was also a human. He thinks he doesn't feel anything when he kills a Volk, but that guy kind of got him back on his feet. He says no, that guy wasn't even human because he had Volk blood in him. A guy like that could die and he wouldn't even care because he's part of that Volks gang too. In the middle of his journey, he stops to drink water because he's thirsty, but suddenly he feels rain on his head and thinks he needs to find somewhere to take shelter. So he continues walking through the hills until he finds a cave. He stays there, builds a fire, and warms up together with Sandal. But while he was sleeping, a noise woke him up. A bear was approaching the cave, a very hungry bear. A little later, Leto was roasting the bear's meat, eating it and saying that it tasted good. The next morning, he continued on his way. Leto thinks that if this is true, if humans have attacked slave traders, it means that a fight must have taken place, and a fight always leaves traces, until Sandal finally wakes up, barking, and Leto asks if he's recovered yet. Then Sandal jumps out of Leto's hood. Leto comments that he's still weak and shouldn't be wandering around an unknown place like this. But Sandal says he's found traces over there, and Leto thinks he's smelling something. The first thing they come across is a decomposing corpse, and Leto wonders who did this to it. It's likely that the dead people lying there weren't the ones who saved his brother. Then he hears a noise coming from the forest and comes across a young Volk, walking past with some fruit in her mouth, asking if there was a human around. Leto sees her and asks, "Hey, is there a Volk here?" She runs off and Leto tells her to wait. He starts running after her, thinking that this is too dangerous, but he has to stop her before she calls other folks to catch him. She trips and falls, knocking over all the fruit. While she's recovering from the blow to the head, Leto appears in front of her with his fork and tells her that it was her bad luck to be born a Volk before attacking her. However, she doesn't seem to be afraid because Leto is held down by another, much larger Volk, at which point he is knocked out. After that, he wakes up with water in his face. It was that Volk girl who threw it at him. He starts drowning drowning in the water and she says he's kind of scary. Leto wonders what happened and where he is. He remembers that he was knocked out by another Volk who appeared, and wonders if they're human hunters too. So he starts breaking the pole he's tied to using brute force. But the big Volk arrives, telling him he doesn't have to do that. He explains that the reason he tied Leto up was because he was afraid of him turning into a monster. He says that he has no desire to hurt him and that he will let him go now. However, the girl starts screaming, saying that he's a winker and that her father shouldn't let him go. But the Volk says that Leto has managed to transform his hand back, which means that he controls this transformation. He also tells Leto that his dog, Sandal, is fine. Leto wonders what their intentions are and thinks he's going to kill that Volk as soon as he's released. Suddenly, a person in the background, who seemed to be using crutches, says that he's managing to walk a little today. Leto is shocked to see who it is. It's Waven. Waven also recognizes his brother. As soon as he is released, Leto runs towards him and gives him a very tight hug. Waven wonders if it really is his brother, as he can't see. Leto just thanks him for being alive and well. Volk's father says that it seems their meeting wasn't just a coincidence. A flashback to 2 months ago appears, when Waven was being taken away as a slave. The hunters wondered if he was really worth any money for being blind, but decided to sell him cheaply to a castle that was looking for children. They said they only needed his skin. Then Waven began to hear the hunters dying and screaming in pain, without understanding anything that was happening. A little later, over dinner, he explains his whole story to Leto. He says that he fell unconscious after all the commotion, and when he woke up, those people were already looking after him, so he had been there ever since. The Volk mother of the family starts serving pots of soup, and Leto gets one too, but of course he was suspicious. It seemed that the folks were being kind to him. The Volk father tells him to try it, because it's certainly better than the bowls of barley he used to eat. Leto wonders what's in that food. The daughter of the family comments that if he's worried that there's poison in it, she says that he's very suspicious of things. Waven says it's very tasty, but Leto keeps wondering why there are Volks helping humans in that place. It doesn't make sense to him. As he sits at the table eating with the Volks, he thinks something is wrong. In the middle of the night, Leto wakes up his brother Waven and pulls him out, trying to get away. He says that those guys are Volks, and he never knows when they might attack. But Waven trusts them, because they took care of him. Then Waven falls, and Leto tells him that he has to get up, that they have to get out of there. But Waven replies that he doesn't want to, and begins to explain that he has no prospect of getting out of that situation alive. He couldn't see, and besides, his brother wasn't by his side, but those people he distrusted so much took care of him. Then Father Volk appears, saying that it's a bit difficult for Waven to run, as his bones haven't fully recovered from what happened, and he needs to rest for another 2 weeks. He tells Leto that he can leave whenever he wants, but it's better if he just says goodbye to his brother and goes. Leto asks why they are helping his brother. The Volk replies that, yes, he's a Volk and they're both human. They're different, but so what? Meanwhile, human refugees are trying to go elsewhere, fleeing. They were heading west, but one woman was worried that it had become a battlefield. The man says that the east is already uninhabitable for humans. The elves take care of everything there, and if humans stay, they will become slaves or die. The west is their best bet, because at least there's a human army there. Suddenly, a child notices something in the water and comments that there is a reflection of 2 moons. But it wasn't a reflection. Suddenly, something comes out of the water and kills the man in front. Everyone is alarmed by what has happened, but no one can see what is attacked. Another man sees the same thing in the water, 2 eyes staring at him. He knows what it is. It's the water runner. They run out of there, but the runner won't give up on his prey. One of the men stays to buy time with his axe, but the runner rushes past with his scythe and mercilessly rips the man's head off. A little later, everyone is dead, and the water runner slowly climbs out of the river. We only see his armor mask, which slowly dissipates, revealing his face, a blue-blonde elf, just like Cain. One person says that Cain is still alive. That person is Lady Bader. She says that Cain is a very dangerous man, and that they must deal with him as quickly as possible. She asks if he needs the help of her assassins, but the water runner replies that he doesn't, that he will kill Cain himself. I've already told Bader not to interfere. She agrees and says that it makes sense. If the runner kills Cain with his own strength, it will be much more meaningful. She adds that, in this way, they will at least be able to pay for some of the sin that the water runner committed by being born half-human. She also says that the king is dead, and that Prince Homer's coronation will take place soon. Bader comments that, as he is dumb and cowardly, it will be easy to exploit this. When Homer becomes king, he will finally be of great help, and then the runner's will be fulfilled. Meanwhile, in the capital of the Elven Kingdom, Tenderloin, we see Homer with his father, the king. The king asks his son if a slave has stabbed him in the eye. He says that he sent his son to Camp's castle so that he could be near the battlefield and become stronger, but it doesn't seem to have worked. The king also says that he never expected his son to work alongside Bitten. She's a witch, and he always told Homer to beware of witches. The king warns his son that he doesn't know how dangerous the situation he's in now is, and guides him again to go to the battlefield. Look for the other knights in the restaurant and ask them for help. He then tells him to keep an eye on Albino's palace, because the day he dies, the kingdom will belong to Homer. A while later, the king dies. After the coffin is closed, the wake begins, and the important people of the kingdom show up. Of course, it's the king's funeral, but soon afterwards there's also the coronation of Prince Homer, who finally becomes king of the Elven kingdom. Of course, there were rumors and murmurs going around among the people, but Homer didn't seem very happy after becoming king. He says that everyone was laughing at his expense, commenting on a human slave who stabbed him in the eye. Everyone was underestimating Prince Homer, and he was very angry about it. They need to find that slave. He wants to kill him with his bare hands. He wonders why his eye never returns to normal. Then Lady Bator approaches and informs them that Cain has appeared at Seorim Castle and killed Count Pilar before disappearing. Homer says that they don't need assassins from now on. He'll make his own moves. Bitten comments that now he's become king. He's done his part, and he expects Homer to do his part. He replies that he will, but asks why she needs witches for that. She says that their lineage began with witches, and that they live according to the wishes of their leader, the great witch leader. The esteemed supreme witch has an enormous thirst for knowledge of the ancient language, of what happened in the past, and for them, language is the most important thing in this world. Bitten goes on to say that they have heard that there are many ancient ruins on the western battlefield, and she is sure that there are records of this ancient language there. She just wants permission for them to search that battlefield just once. She says she might go there herself to find it. Homer says that the war with the humans is going on much longer than it should, and that the doctors are scheduled to go to the battlefield during the handover. The king says he'll go and then he'll meet Bitten in the ruin. Bitten says it's a very wise vision on his part. He sends her back, as he is tired of the coronation ceremony. When she leaves, both he and his bodyguard remain silent. The bodyguard says that even though the king is dead now and Homer is king, he is impressed by the power of the witches. He says that maybe getting involved with them is too dangerous. Homer replies that this is why he wants to go to the battlefield himself. Technically, it's the safest place to be with a witch. The bodyguard says that this war has already been won against the humans. All the king has to do is lead the soldiers and end everything on the battlefield at once. Then, of course, Homer will gain his influence. And the king says that the witches will be next, and then the Bitten family will also finish off the Red Army. All those who underestimated him return to where Leto is with the Volk family. We see the Folk girl throw a toothpick, and Cerberus runs out to catch it, all cute. However, he ends up hitting Leto right in the face, who was a bit annoyed by the prank, but it seems that Cerberus was actually quite excited. Folk's father calls them off on a hunt, while the mother of the family and Avon stay at home. The other three set off on their journey through the forest. Leto, as always, is very worried, looking around. The girl tells him not to be so worried because no one is going to do anything to him. The Folk father also says that only they live there, so he can relax. But Leto replies that when his brother recovers completely, they'll leave immediately. The girl is amazed at the protagonist's effrontery, as he hasn't even thanked them for saving his brother. But Leto says he's thanking them in another way, by helping them with work. Suddenly, Father Volk points to something and says that it's food, and that they have to get some honey that's in there to help Avon recover. Father Volk says that the honey is a natural remedy that will help Avon a lot. Leto runs off, saying he's going to collect it all, but sometime later he turns up with a swollen face, stung by bees, and both the girl and Cerberus call him ugly. Then they catch a rabbit to make a stew, collect more wood, and take it home. There's another family dinner, and in the wee hours of the morning, Avon asks his brother if they're really going to get out of there. Leto says yes. When they recover, they'll go to a place where humans live, but Avon says he likes it there. Leto explains that they don't get involved with the folk because they're very different from humans. Avon replies that he doesn't think they're so different. The next morning, Father Volk calls Leto and asks if he can talk to him for a moment. Leto asks what's wrong, but Father Volk leans against a tree and asks if Leto has ever heard of the sixth sense. Leto says yes, he's heard of that damned bastard Cain, and Father Volk begins to explain that the sixth sense is a sense beyond the ordinary five. If he practices the sixth sense, the other five will also be developed simultaneously. In other words, he will become much stronger physically. At this point, he simply breaks the tree in half with just one fist, and Leto is impressed by this. Father Volk has knocked down a tree with one punch. Father Volk says that the most important thing is that if he controls his sixth sense, he'll be able to control the blinking spider's transformation much better. At this point, Father Volk wants to start teaching Leto how to use his sixth sense. Leto asks what the connection is between the sixth sense and controlling the spider's powers. Father Volk says he doesn't know for sure, but assures him that it will be useful for him. Leto is a little hesitant and asks if he will really gain his sixth sense by standing there staring at him. Father Volk replies that the sixth sense is usually acquired in battle, but they're not going to use that method. To To start with the sixth sense, you need to know your opponent. If you learn about all your enemies, one day you'll develop your sixth sense. Leto reflects on this, perceiving the opponent in short, finding the enemy's weakness and using that against him. Father Folk gives a little smile and says that Leto seems to understand. Suddenly it starts to rain, and Father Folk is confused, as it's not the rainy season. He says that they will start training tomorrow. It is also explained that in the beginning there was a white light, and the darkness tried to swallow up the light. But when it reacted, the light split into several colors and the world was created. The first intelligent species set foot in that world. Whoever was reading this was the Volk girl, and she says that ancient species were called albinos. Today they are extinct, and there are only records of them, but it is not written how they became extinct. Avon is impressed by this story, but Leto asks who wrote it, which is full of nonsense. The girl retorts by saying that it was written by the great adventurer and philosopher Jania Elliott, and that he probably doesn't even know about it because he's ignorant. She says that, as expected of humans, he is very stupid. Avon, still impressed, asks her if albinos really once existed. She replies that they did, of course, and that they lived at the bottom of the West. Leto asks her if, by any chance, she was there to see it, and she replies that she wasn't, but that she believes what's in the book. She mentions that, even though the West has become a very dangerous battlefield, she wants to visit the place one day and perhaps in the future, even write a book about it. Avon gets all excited, but Leto doesn't show the same enthusiasm. The next morning, he returns to his training with his father Volk. Again, they stare at each other for a while, and Leto wonders if they're really training, because it's been days, and he's still just staring at his father. He begins to feel a little uncomfortable about this. Father Volk says that the eyes are the window to the soul, and that understanding his opponent is the first step to unlocking the sixth sense. To do this, perhaps he needs to see the world in gray. Then, 3 days later, we see Avon calling Leto and asking for help to walk on his own, without his crutches. Leto replies, "Sure, let's go." They walk to the edge of a river, and Leto asks him how his leg is, if it's recovered well. Avon says yes, he can stand on one leg from time to time. Leto replies that this is great, so they'll soon be able to get out of there. Avon asks where they're going, and Leto explains that they're going where they say the humans are living. Avon comments that the battlefield will be dangerous, but Leto assures him that if they go carefully, they'll reach the human colony. Leto tells Avon to stand still while he walks a bit away, and asks Avon to walk up to him, unaided. Leto takes the opportunity to train his sixth sense, as his father Volk taught him, which is to perceive his opponent. It's easier since it's his own brother, and he knows him very well. Suddenly, a Volk child sees them and is stunned to see humans, running off to warn the others. He needs to warn the human hunters in order to receive a reward, but just then, Leto quickly grabs the child by the neck and throws him to the ground. The child starts crying, saying that she won't tell anyone she saw them. Leto was ready to kill her, but only didn't because Avon arrived in time. Leto explains that it's dangerous if that Volk tells the others, but Avon didn't want him to do that. Leto didn't care and was ready to kill the child. Just then, the daughter of the Volk family arrives and kicks the boy in the face, asking if he's crazy. Later, at the Volk family home, the Volk mother asks how the child got there. The Volk father says he doesn't know. Maybe she got lost on the way. The daughter mentions that Leto was planning to kill the boy and calls him a psychopath. Leto replies that it's dangerous for him and his brother if that Volk warns the human hunters. She complains that he lost sight of the boy during the argument. The father ponders what to do, and the daughter asks her father why he saved Leto, saying he wasn't worth it. She wants him to be caught by the zealots and killed, slamming the bedroom door. The mother calls her daughter's name, and we finally know her name. Since this book doesn't usually mention the names of the characters, she says she didn't mean it and that she was going to tell a story about her older brother, but her father stops her. The father says that they have to get out of there when the sun goes down, because what Leto said is true. They are in danger now. Leto confirms that they are. Sometime later, we see a large march of Volks approaching, shouting. The child who spotted Leto says he saw humans near the forest, a human with a giant fork in his hand. The soldiers are confused by what he's saying. Suddenly, a foot steps towards the child. It's an elf knight who steps on him and puts her sword to his head, asking how he dares to interrupt the march to say that. The child, desperate, begs forgiveness. The count approaches her and tells her to stop, because she is disgracing the knights. She glares at him, asking what he said, and the count simply replies that she should stop now. She asks what he will do if she doesn't stop, until the king appears and tells her to stop. This time, it works. As he approaches, we see a large cyclops on a throne, with the king sitting on it. He asks the boy to repeat what he said about the human with the giant fork. Meanwhile, back at the Volk family home, the Volk mother is putting food in Avon's backpack. The daughter, thrilled, says that she'll definitely put Avon in her book, along with the dog and the psychopathic brother. Father Volk, for his part, is guiding Leto, showing him the way he should go, now using the hidden mountain path to get to the west. When they are ready to leave, suddenly someone interrupts them. It's a small platoon of soldiers from the big march that has approached. A Volk soldier asks why there are humans and Volks there together. One of the soldiers points to Leto and says that he's the one they're looking for, the famous boy with the fork who pierced the king's eye. One of the soldiers tells another to run and tell the king that they've found him. He points his sword at the other folks in the family and says that if they are Volks helping humans, they must prove otherwise if they don't want to die. Father Volk must take the axe and kill the human in front of him, or not only him, but his whole family will die. Father Volk picks up the axe and places it next to Leto's head, but instead of killing him, he throws the axe, which hits one of the soldier's bullets. The soldier doesn't even see what's coming. Father Volk quickly approaches, grabs the soldier's head and says that this little bowl soldier will never kill him. He simply sinks the soldier's head into the ground and, leaning on his body, kicks the next one. The last soldier is knocked out with one punch, knocking out a tooth. With the three of them lying there, Father Volk tells Leto that they need to get out of there quickly, because more soldiers are probably coming. But Leto notices something and warns him. It was that same knight who was standing next to the king. She even hits him with a graze and says that he dodged it, and must be very lucky for that. Or maybe he's too skilled for a Volk who lives in a hut. The Volk father is worried, as this woman is a knight. He warns her that it's an emergency, and that she already knows what to do. Although she didn't want to, she knows very well what to do and rushes off with her mother, telling the humans to follow her if they want to live. The knight says that the humans will die at some point, because the king and his march of soldiers will surround them from the other side. She mentions that this king is an idiot for having been pierced in the eye by a child, and that now there's a new king, one who can't even use his sixth sense, asking if this isn't funny. She rushes at her Volk father, making a grazing cut on his neck. He manages to pick up the pace and dodges her attacks, who is impressed by his skill. She asks who he is. Then, deciding to pick up the pace, she launches a much faster and rougher attack in his direction, but he dodges it quickly, retreating. On the way, he steals the sword of one of the fallen soldiers, takes a deep breath, concentrates, and goes for her too. The knight is impressed to realize that he also has a sixth sense, but as Volk's sword approaches, she uses her sixth sense and an ability that quickly pierces him in several places. The woman starts to say that, as he's a Volk, he must not have received very decent training, but he's still a soldier, isn't he? He probably mastered his sixth sense on the battlefield. She warns that helping humans and attacking soldiers is punishable by execution. Meanwhile, the family and siblings are fleeing far away. Leto asks where they are being taken, and Sei replies that they're going to an emergency location. Leto asks what kind of emergency, and Sai explains that her father is an army deserter, so he lives in hiding. Leto comments that in his lifetime, her father must have killed many humans. Sai says that it was war. It was kill or be killed. She says that her older brother died in the war, killed by humans. Suddenly, Leto says he's going to go his separate way with his brother. Sei gets worried and says that this is very dangerous, that they didn't listen to her father. But Leto says he doesn't care and will leave anyway. Sei turns a little red and says that he can go, that she doesn't mind him either. Then suddenly an arrow hits her mother, and she starts crying in despair, running to her aid. The king says that he missed the shot because of the bad eye he still has, and that he has finally found it to take revenge for his eyes. Of course, he sends the entire army that is there against them, but Leto must be captured alive. Leto warns Avon not to move, that he's going to fight. He charges at the soldiers, transforms his claws and kills the first one in front of him. He almost gets hit by a sword, but manages to transform his fork and defend himself, only to be thrown away. Just as he's about to be finished off by a soldier, Sandal appears and jumps into the soldier's face, grabbing onto him. Suddenly, Sandal grows up and simply grabs the soldier's head. Meanwhile, Sei is mourning the death of her mother, but is filled with rage, picks up a stone and hurls it at a soldier with such power that he is thrown almost headless away. The count wonders if this is really what he's thinking. One of the king's knights says that yes, that is the sixth sense. He comments that he has heard that the sixth sense can only be discovered on the battlefield, and that a person who lives like that, in the middle of nowhere, would be able to learn it is a very rare case. This knight teases the king, saying that even some elves can't use their sixth sense. He comes down from the hill and says that he will look after everyone there, asking the king to keep an eye on him. Both he and the earl say that this guy is very insolent. While Sandal is killing one more, Avon is lost, calling for his brother. When the king realizes that this is Leto's brother, he smiles evilly. While Sei is looking after some soldiers, a knight comes at her with his sword. However, she manages to dodge the attacks, and as she crouches down by the last of them, she picks up a stone and hits him full in the face, leaving the knight enraged. Meanwhile, Leto is surrounded by several soldiers who wonder how this kid is so powerful. One of the soldiers tells him he's a blinker, but they all go after him anyway. Leto thinks that to get out of this situation, he needs to transform even more, but he doesn't want to become a monster. However, he starts to lose control and wonders if he really doesn't care. He needs to protect Avon. When he looks at Avon, he sees that he has an arrow stuck in his chest, saying that it hurts. Another arrow hits Avon, who falls to the ground dead. The king says he made a mistake again because he wasn't planning to kill him. It must be because of his bad eye. Leto, seeing this, remembers the promise he made to Avon, who said that these folks who took care of him were good people. But Leto says that the Volks are all the same. Avon hasn't forgotten what they did. They destroyed his village, his villagers, his father, his mother. Blue skin or green skin, they're all enemies, and he must kill them all. At that moment, overwhelmed by an unreacting fury, Leto begins to transform even more, thinking he has to eliminate everyone. When the soldiers charge at him, they are horrified, and unable to run, they all die instantly one by one. Meanwhile, Sai is almost defeated in front of the knight, who said that everyone has a limit, and she has reached hers. He doesn't notice Leto's attack coming towards him. Without him having time to react, the knight is broken in half. This was so fast that he was still conscious, seeing his own body below as his head flew away. The king is startled by this sight, and Conte says that Leto has completely turned into a blinker. The king worries as he sees him approaching rapidly. Conte tells the king not to worry, but soon a cyclops behind them is completely torn apart. His head explodes. They slowly turn around to see Leto, who removes the claw from inside the cyclops. He was ready to kill everyone in front of him. He was now completely transformed, with armor and a blinker shell. Both the king and Contes were unresponsive at this point, but Leto brutally attacked Contes. Contes barely manages to hold on to the kick, but manages to throw it away. Taking advantage of the gap, he tries to attack Leto, who quickly dodges. However, he ends up with a crack in his helmet. Contes mentions that Leto's weakness is his right arm, and explains that the armor is the exoskeleton of a blinker. He notes that not all parts of the exoskeleton are equally strong. The further away from the original part of the shell, the weaker it is. So surely the right arm is the source of Leto's weakness. The king is shocked by Contes' quick conclusion, and says he'll take care of the rear, as he's too frightened. Contes shouts back, calling all the soldiers. But the king thought he was talking to him. Contes was actually shouting at the Volk soldiers, telling them all to go up, questioning what they were waiting for. That night, with the light of the moon illuminating the battlefield, a cloudy sky closes in. When complete darkness consumes the place, all that can be heard is gushing blood and screams of pain. When lightning flashes in the sky, we can see Leto killing one by one in the middle of the storm. No one will be spared. Contes was almost hit but managed to counterattack Leto. Even though he was tired, he wasn't defeated, but part of one of Leto's horns was damaged. Contes thinks there's no point in trying to hit Leto. He needs one big attack to completely break through his enemy's armor. Leto is so fast this time that Contes only notices the attack because the rain around Leto stops. Even Leto is impressed that Contes managed to block the blow. Contes claims that his armor is top-notch and will never be penetrated, but Leto doesn't care. He delivers a powerful blow that does direct damage to Contes' body. Contes almost vomits at that moment and thinks that Leto is so powerful at this stage of transformation that his blows resonate through the armor he is wearing. Meanwhile, the father of the Volk family walks tired and wounded until he falls to the ground with no strength left. The knight hasn't given up on him yet. She says she's surprised he's lasted this long, and it looks like he's really put up quite a fight on the battlefield. She mentions that if he had been in that war that took place a long time ago, he might be much stronger than he is today. She says that for these species, strength is power, and both elves and Volks become powerful to lead. Until she hears a sound in the forest and wonders who is there. She says it's someone with such a murderous look that she doesn't even need her sixth sense to feel it. This person approaches and asks if he can spare the man for a moment because he wants to ask a question. We see that it's a Volk with strange clothes and very long hair. The knight comments that this Volk is very arrogant for talking like that, until an elf approaches from behind. The knight recognizes the elf, who introduces himself as Vlad, the rare species. However, Volk already knew he was coming. Vlad says he was expected because of the senses she possesses and calls her Yara, praising her sensing abilities. Yara says that's what Kane said, but asks if Vlad has nothing to do. On hearing Kane's name, Vlad becomes emotional and says that he hasn't seen Kane for 2 months. The knight then wonders how Vlad got there so quickly, and he goes on to say that he can't forget Kane's blonde hair and black lips. The knight becomes pensive. He lies down on the Volk's body and mentions that this Volk is a traitor who left the battlefield without realizing the grace that Kane had given him. He tells him that Kane only bit off one of his ears and forgave him, but Vlad wants to make a mockery of him. It's a shame he's almost dead, but the knight interrupts and says that Vlad is forbidden to set foot in that territory. She asks what he's doing there, and apparently he was exiled for being a mixture of elf and Volk. He was banished for that, but he was a former knight. Vlad jumps out at her and says he won't leave until he finds Kane. If she stands in in his way, she will be torn to pieces. The knight thinks that, as expected, he has immense power. His aura alone imposes a lot of power. She says it's time to go and concludes that she's not strong enough to kill Vlad yet. She decides that she will go to the battlefield to meet up with the king's march again. As she walks away, Vlad thinks that, at her age, this girl would surely be able to defeat him, but he forgets. She approaches the Volk and asks where Cain is. The Volk replies that he doesn't know. He hasn't seen him since the battlefield and bets that he's in the mountains. Vlad tells the Volk to stop lying because he can smell Cain on him, but Yara says that the Volk isn't lying and suggests that they leave soon. Volk asks Yara for a favor, and she wonders how he can dare ask her for anything after deserting. He goes on to say that he now has a family, a wife and a daughter. He lost his son in battle too, but he doesn't want that to happen to the rest of his family. Yara wonders if he really wants that, after leaving the battlefield and killing so many humans. Perhaps he has lost some of his strength because he wants peace. The Volk slowly closes his eyes, remembering his family, his wife, and his daughter, and remembers the moment he deserted. Cain asks if he really wants to leave, and the Volk says yes. Cain says that, in this world, there's nothing you can do to survive apart from getting stronger. But to be strong, you have to be evil. For a Volk like him, that's difficult. The Volk regrets that his son died because he was weak, and admits that he is no different either, but simply says that he wants to leave. At that moment, Cain makes a cut, and the Volk's ear falls to the ground. Cain says he can go now, because he was never any good at that job anyway, and then the Volk dies. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Contes thinks that the protagonist is more powerful than him at the moment. He tells Homer that they need to retreat now, making up the excuse that he hasn't been feeling well since yesterday, and that they need to go back and regroup. But the king says he won't leave until that little fucking slave is dead. Contes wants to get out of the fight against a child, so he suggests that the king could give him a hand, since he is the king. The king nervously says that he's not feeling very well either, as his eye hasn't recovered, so they run out of there, and Leto certainly wouldn't put it past them. At that moment, Sei calls Avon, holding him back, saying that if he doesn't return now, he really will become a monster. But Leto doesn't care and runs towards the king. Sei calls him an idiot, but he continues to chase the king at high speed. He tells Contes to do something, but Contes thinks that if he is caught by that monster, he will die. He joined the king just because he wanted a promotion, but this guy wants him dead. Meanwhile, Homer is shouting in Contes' ear until Contes grabs Homer, calling him useless, and throws him in Leto's direction, saying that he's worthless. Homer falls, and Contes leaves him behind. The king, while cursing Contes, sees Leto approaching, who immediately punches him in the face and starts punching him several times. The king's face is twisted and swollen, and he is dragged backwards by Leto. Leto lifts him up on one leg, and upside down, the king still has the audacity to try to curse Leto, but he receives more punches and is thrown away. Leto walks slowly towards him. Now the king begins to apologize and beg for mercy, but it doesn't matter much to Leto at this point. As he roars about to kill the king, he is stoned in the back. As he turns around, he sees Sei telling him that he needs to come to his senses. Now Leto is moving quickly towards her, and she thinks about practicing something she's read, but Vlad appears and grabs her arm, telling her not to be so irresponsible. He explains that what she is about to try may seem to work, but it won't be enough. Vlad actually wants to show her the gray world. In this gray world, the protagonist is being seen with a bizarre and terrible spider that just wants everyone to die. Vlad says that Leto is a bit excited, isn't he? Leto asks what's going on, who that guy is, if he's green or blue. Sei thinks that this is gray space, exactly as her favorite writer described it in a book. Vlad explains that this is telepathy, a sixth sense much more advanced than anyone knows. In that hideous spider form, Leto declares that he's going to kill everyone, but Vlad claims that this telepathy can enter the target's mind and destroy everything in his head. He comments that it's much easier to do this with monsters. He then closes his hood and transforms into a bizarre worm, throwing several of them that form a rope towards Leto, who begins to be corrupted and drowned by these huge worms. As Leto is crushed and screams in pain, Sei asks if he will become human again if he does this, but Vlad replies that no, he will die, as he has already lost part of his sanity to the power of the blinking spider. Vlad wonders if she planned to leave Leto alive, but concludes that even so, there is no hope for him. This power will end up sucking out all his mind and intellect, turning him practically into a zombie. Sei, however, doesn't give up on him. She opens those horrible worms and tells him to hold on while she starts to pull him out, trying to get him out of that transformation. She manages to pull him out, even though part of his body is mutilated. When he returns to the normal world, Vlad remarks that it's amazing that she managed to save him while he still had a shred of consciousness left. Sei says that it was she who saved him. Just then, Yara approaches and asks if Sei is Diamond's daughter. Sei is surprised and asks how she knows her father's name. Yara explains that Diamond asked her to keep an eye on Sei and suggests that they bury his body and leave the place. Sei is shocked by the news. Meanwhile, at the edge of a river, we see a hand clutching itself. It's King Homer, who was about to drown, but manages to pull himself up. He feels sad and angry, shouting at the sky. Damon is being buried by his daughter. Yara says she met Diamond on the battlefield, fought alongside him, and asked him to look after Sei. But the decision to go with Yara or not is up to Sei, who says she'll have 30 minutes to decide. Meanwhile, Vlad is analyzing Leto. Noticing that the child has lost consciousness, he says he needs to wake him up to find out where Cain is. Yara mentions having heard rumors that Cain killed the king and was on the run, perhaps to be found in the main castle. Vlad disputes this, saying that Cain is a person of honor who would never do that. This was undoubtedly a plot against him. Vlad promises to chop up whoever did this to Cain's honor, but begins to hang Leto, who is still unconscious, asking where Cain is. At that moment, Sandal starts barking and growling. Vlad asks Yara if she eats dog meat, as he might have to do that now. Suddenly, Cerberus's eyes change and he tells Vlad to wait. Both Vlad and Yara are shocked. Someone starts talking, claiming to have finally managed to communicate. It's the witch Korn, who says she hasn't seen Vlad or Yara for a long time. Yara recognizes the voice and confirms that it is her. In the witch's house, Korn is wearing a helmet to make this telepathy through Sandal. She explains that she is using her sixth sense to enter Cerberus's mind. Yara suspects it's telepathy, and in desperation, Vlad asks Korn if she's seen Cain. He left the battlefield without telling anyone, but Korn informs him that Cain is right next to her. Vlad becomes desperate and asks her to speak to Cain as he wants to hear his voice, but Korn replies that this is not possible, as only she is connected to Sandal. Korn then takes a look at Leto, and Vlad says that he was about to kill that useless child. Korn, however, says that he can't do that, and that Cain has forbidden Vlad to kill Leto. He can only cut off the child's right arm. Vlad asks why the right arm, and she explains that it is a form of punishment for Leto. With a thirst for blood, Vlad doesn't think twice before pulling the arm out and biting it. He tells Sandal that he has eaten the arm, but that it is regenerating because of the spider's power. After that, they decide where to meet. On the way, we see Leto being carried, his arm regenerating. Vlad comments that his arm is really fascinating. It's recovering faster than his, who is an elf. Sei accompanies them, and Yara asks why Sei has decided to accompany them. If they continue along the path, they will reach the old battlefield, and even though Sei hates fighting, she will have to. If she grows up under Cain's care, she may survive, but she will have to adapt. Otherwise, she will die. Sei begins to explain that, when she was young, her father and older brother were called to the battlefield. There, she lost her brother, and her father was blinded by hatred, killing many humans because of it. But one day he regained his senses, having killed the son of a human who felt the same pain as him. After returning home, he started helping humans secretly, but ended up dying for it. Sei confesses that she still doesn't understand if her father was guilty, since it was the humans who started the war that led them there. She says she will follow in her father's footsteps to understand why he did everything he did. Yara warns that Sei will feel like he's on the battlefield when he gets there. Sei is optimistic, but Yara warns that the reality is that that world is hell. Both his father and brother were weak because they couldn't be mean enough on the battlefield, and that's what led to their deaths. Until Vlad says they're finally coming. Once again, we see that giant house moving towards them. It stops, turns, and turns around. When the doors open, Vlad is impressed and thrilled because he is finally seeing Cain again, who was waiting for him there. And Vlad says it's good that Cain is alive and well, but Cain simply asks Vlad if he has anything else to do in the West. Vlad says that he was very worried about Lord Cain because people tried to tarnish his honor by claiming that he killed the king. Cain turns around and says that everything is excused, and Vlad begins to worship him as if he were a god, tearfully thanking him. Yara introduces Sei, saying that she is Dion's daughter and that if Cain allows it, she will take care of Sei herself and raise her on the battlefield. She glares, thinking that this is the man her father followed into battle. Cain tells them to keep an eye on her. Meanwhile, Leto was lying there all wounded, and Cerberus was waking up, licking his face. Cain says that he warned him that if he ran, he would die, and stares at him, calling him a fork. After that, Sei simply hears a scream. It's Leto, who has lost his arm again because Cain's armor hurt him. Cain says he's not going to kill him, and they spent a long time at it. Leto's arm was cut off every time it grew back. That was the punishment for running away from Cain. After that, they got on the witch's giant crab and headed west towards the battlefield. Halfway there, they were caught in an ambush. Several Volks assassins got on the giant crab. Vlad tells Cain to stay inside because they'll take care of it. Vlad grabs the face of the first one and lacerates him completely with his claws. The other one, who tries to attack Vlad from behind, is caught by Yara, who, with the blade at the end of her hair, cuts the necks of the two murderers and puts the blade back in the bun. Cain thinks that if he stays there any longer, his body will rust. He wants to have some fun, but at that moment Vlad was killing the last of them and tells Yara that she's getting strong. Cain is disappointed that he didn't leave any killers for himself. Meanwhile, all along the way, Sei was writing in a book. Yara asks what she's writing so much about, and Sei says she's recording everything she sees. She wants to make a book of her experiences, just like her favorite author, Janya Elliott. Then Yara asks about that name, and Sei is surprised to ask, "Don't you know who Janya Elliott is?" And Yara replies that she doesn't, that she only knows how to fight. She's one of the most emotionless assassins in Casa Bathory. Sei says this while squeezing Yara's breast, and Yara says that Sei is the opposite of that she's very interesting, a Volk who isn't just interested in fighting and even reads. Yara also says that Janya Elliott is an inspirational figure for witches. No one knows her gender or her appearance, but she's sure she was an elf. Then another scream is heard, and Cain says that this is the third time Leto has lost his arm. He says that Leto will never get used to this pain. Every time it will be a new experience, and Leto needs to remember this in order to escape the pain. He has to be the person who causes it. Taking into account the time it took for Leto's arm to be eaten for the 5th time, they come across a large mountain range through the thick mist. Yara says she's only coming so far, and Cain tells her she can go with him anyway. She's already been exiled because she's not skilled enough. Yara says that's not true, that she's still a witch, and witches are legally forbidden to set foot in the Western lands. She also has more to do and leaves, saying that if she needs to, she'll get in touch using Leto's Cerberus. Now they find themselves on Tibone Mountain, a spine layer of the albino goddess, the highest rocky mountain on the albino continent. Its height reaches the clouds, and its steep slope makes it impossible to climb. The continent of Albina is divided into east and west by its natural barrier, the Tibone mountain range. There is a place in the Grey Mountains called Broken Bone. It is said that it is possible to cross the two lands through this place. There is a human castle there, but it now belongs to the Elves. Vlad explains that it's currently the territory of the Pullfork family. It's too dangerous to go near, and Lord Cain is easily accused of killing the king, which makes matters worse. Vlad says that those damned Pullfork family have taken the castle that was once his, but that they'll get through anyway. They won't climb because there is a way, through a hole. Sei goes on to write in her book that the gray rocky mountains are perforated with countless porous holes, small and large, all over the mountain. Some of these holes are connected, forming a passage. Vlad then approaches Sei, sees that she is writing, and asks her if she would be interested in writing a book about Lord Cain. She says she could if she had the time, but she doesn't think she will. Meanwhile, Leto offers Cain his arm and asks what he's doing. Leto says he can devour his arm as many times as he likes, but in return he wants Cain to teach him the 6th sense. He wants to get stronger. He wants to become a demon. Cain says he doesn't need to. The Saran armor is already completely satisfied, but he can teach him the 6th sense slowly and gradually. Judging by the look on Leto's face, Cain thinks he'll soon understand how it works, or maybe he already has. Meanwhile, Vlad was thinking that he doesn't like Leto. He doesn't like that Cain has taken in a human, and he doesn't like how the boy is monopolizing Lord Cain's attention. Vlad considers Cain to be a unique and perfect being, and believes that the boy is contaminating him. He thinks that, when he gets the chance, he will secretly kill Leto. After that, they went through the hollows of the mountain. Leto, for his part, was reflecting. He had to kill them all, whether they were green or blue. He had that evil look on his face until Sei looked at him, and he looked away. She also looks away soon after, and thinks that everything happened because of him, that her parents died because of him. Then she writes in her book that she walked through endless darkness. As time slowly passed, a purple light began to illuminate the exit. When he finally came out of the cave, he saw a completely purple sky, with strangely shaped gray rocks everywhere. Desolation, fear, curiosity. This was the West, the place where Janya Elliott's great journey began. Someone suddenly shouts for Cain from up on the mountain. It's those characters who appeared much earlier in the book, a darker-skinned Volk and a very hairy mouse-like creature. The Volk is happy to see that Cain has returned. Meanwhile, somewhere, we see a catapult throwing a stone at a castle. Actually, it wasn't really a catapult, but a knight in shining armor using a catapult spoon. Until an ogre puts in another round of ammunition, and this mustachioed little dwarf throws a rock with all his might, which opens up a huge hole in the castle wall. He says that the way is now clear, and that the troops should advance. This army was about to annihilate the humans, and there were many more folks attacking than humans defending themselves. The humans, even though the castle walls had collapsed, didn't hesitate and shot back with arrows. Meanwhile, down below, where the wall had broken, several human and folk soldiers were fighting each other. The Knight of the Spoon thinks that when the elves regain their strength, the humans will too. He thinks that there are too many humans, and that, Every time there are too many of them like worms, until someone calls out to him, the Lord of the Spoon, and says that he has a message for him. Now guys, it's time for dinner and dessert. We've got the knife, the fork, and the spoon. The messenger says that the restaurant's knights were gathering, but suddenly, Lord Spoon knocks the guy off his horse and says that, even on a battlefield like that, who dares pass a message on a horse? He thinks it's more special up there. Lord Spoon goes on to say that if it's not very shocking news, he'll smash the Volk messenger's head in with his spoon. The messenger then says that the king is dead and they're saying it was Cain who killed him. Meanwhile, where Cain and his troop are resting, they are having dinner at the moment. Vlad tells them that they searched for the best ingredients in the region to prepare this meal for Cain, but he simply says that the meat is tough. This makes Vlad turn from blue to white, and he looks at who seems to have cooked it, which were those folks. The martial arts pumped Volk says the food is amazing, but the hairy one comments that he'll eat anything. Then suddenly, he faces both Yara and Leto and says, "Can these guys fight by any chance? Because they look very weak." Leto wonders who that little guy is, until the big furry guy explains that that boy is a winker, and that maybe that will make Leto a bit useful. He talks to Lord Cain saying that, speaking of witches, a strange thing has happened. The big furry guy confirms that they've found a total of 3 winkers this month alone, in places where spiders don't usually live. Volk says that one of these winkers was 10 times his size, but the big furry guy corrects him that it was only 3 times. Cain says that if there's a winker that size, then the female spider must also be huge and perhaps not even a winking spider. It's more like an aristocrat spider. Ha ha ha. At that moment, everyone falls silent, and Vlad starts laughing a lot, saying that that was a really good joke, Lord Cain. Everyone starts laughing a lot, while Leto thinks that everyone there is an idiot. At this point, the being copies his voice, saying idiots. Something not very nice happens right after that, and Cain says that they're going to move on to the main topic of this meeting. We see that Leto has lost his arm again, and says that he's taking those 2 children with him now. He says that from now on, the priority is to kill King Ram, but killing the king means that they will face the whole kingdom, which has tens of thousands of Volk soldiers, hundreds of elven knights, and maybe even all the knights from the restaurant next to the kingdom. Cain says that to defeat all these people, he needs to find his Red Army, and surely most of them will still follow his lead. The martial arts Volk then says they'd better leave soon, before they can meet up in the kingdom, but Cain says no. He's going to divide the troop into 2 teams. The first team will consist of Vlad, Fiona, Drew, and Ara, and the other team will be Cain himself, Fork, Sai, and Cerberus. Vlad is shocked by this, as he will be far away from Lord Cain, and then Vlad asks why this separation now. Cain replies that it's because everyone there has become too powerful, which means they have no intention of fighting. In other words, if they're all together, there won't be any fun. At this point, Vlad practically starts crying. 3 days later, we see a knight taking a large stone and placing it on a table. Other knights surround the table to hold a meeting. The knight who set the table and was talking is the Badon Knight. He says that he is gathering the knights of the Round Table restaurant to have at least one partnership today, pointing out that everyone at the round table is equal. The Crushing Knight, the Meat Hammer, says that it's a very appropriate table for the moment, but it would only be better if there was something to decorate it with. The Meticulous Knight, Napkin, says that of the knights of the restaurant, there are only 6 left, but now that Homer has ascended to the reins, there may be 7. The Knight of the Spoon says that, as everyone has heard, it was Cain who killed the king, the one who led the Red Army. He gets angry and says that this is a grave stain on the proud elven race, and that they need to discuss a legal and suitable punishment for Cain, until the last knight laughs about it, wondering how Cain could have killed the king. He says that this is clearly a lie, and that he will never believe this hearsay nonsense. That's the gourmet knight, Coven. Baden scolds him to mind his manners at the round table, but Coven doesn't give a damn about tradition. Everyone there is playing along because they all know what they have to do. He always thought that Cain was annoying and arrogant, so instead of coming up with a bunch of justifications, Coven simply wants to kill Cain. Meanwhile, Cain and his troop are there, with Vlad crying again because they were going to split up. Cain says that the other group is going straight to where the Red Army is. Basil is currently in charge of the soldiers, and he is the most trustworthy of them, since he obeys no one but Cain. When they get to him, all they have to do is pass on the secret code. Cain says he'll see them later, and as he leaves with the children, Vlad starts crying again. 2 days later, we see a large blinker being thrown away. It was Leto who was fighting it, and he seemed much more agile than before. Without much difficulty, he climbs onto the creature's head and starts punching a hole in that AZ. Then, finally, he uses his fork and finishes off the big creature, ripping its head off. Cain comments that it looks like Leto is learning how the sixth sense works. He explains that this can only be mastered through focus and experience in combat. Focus on the enemy you want to hurt. The experience is combat, and his enemy is just a piece of meat. He shouldn't feel sorry for him. Cain goes on to say that as Leto gains experience, there will come a time when the world will seem gray to him, and he will know that he has awakened his sixth sense. At that moment, he will earn the right to be a demon. Leto says yes and glances at Sei, who has been staring at him all this time. Cain looks at her and says that he doesn't like carrying carrying useless baggage, and when they find another winker, she'll be the one to fight him. Kane says he hopes she's different from his father. After that, Kane approaches that dead winker, picks up its skeletons, and says that it's the first time he's seen a winker of that size, and that it's very much the way Fiona described it. Kane asks Fork if the spider that bit him was a giant, and if it isn't interesting too. Leto replies, "Yes, my lord." He thinks that the only reason he's with Kane is to get strong, not because he likes him. Kane tells Leto to call him Lord Kane from now on. Leto calls him Lord Kane and asks why they are going in the opposite direction of the army, since they shouldn't get together as soon as possible. Leto then thinks of reason number 2 for staying with Kane. When he gets the army, a war within Elven society will break out, and Leto will make sure that happens. Kane says yes, that the Red Army is the elite of the Elves. If they are brought here, victory is certain. But Kane says he won't pay much attention to that because it won't be any fun. Leto thinks that would certainly be very boring, you damn bastard. Meanwhile, on the road, Sei is writing in her book. She says that, as they walked west, the purple sky remained static, but the terrain changed constantly. In addition, small and even large creatures appeared that had never been seen from the east. Then one thing really shocked Sei. She saw a stone floating by. Kane says it's just a stone. He picks it up and says that this is a rather rare occurrence. He explains that there are remnants of the goddess Albina in this place, and that the elves call this magical power. The witches have always wanted to come to the west to get this leftover magic. However, Sei mentions that, in the past, the royal family took care of the witches and used the excuse of divine will to take them to the forests, legally forbidding them to go to the west. And Kane says she climbs a lot, huh? And she says she read that in a book. Leto then asks if witches are different from other elves, even though they're of the same race, and Kane replies that that's a stupid question. He thinks that people of the same race are going to be friendly with each other. Kane tells the Fork that he will soon have to kill a human, and Leto thinks that doesn't make sense. He goes on to write that the west always smells of blood, the sky is always purple, and the purple mist spreads everywhere, making it impossible to distinguish day from night. Sometimes, through the mist, you might get the feeling of someone watching you, until suddenly Sei senses something, and so does Kane. He holds an arrow that was about to penetrate his head. Then a figure rushes past, and Kane chases after it. He finds the hiding place of the person who attacked him, which is a hole, and Leto says that the animal that got in there looks dangerous just by looking at it. But Kane kindly pushes Leto inside. After falling all bruised up, he just calls Kane a son of a... But Kane soon climbs down too. He sees a cave that looks very cramped, and Kane tells him that he's feeling danger up ahead and that he's going to lead the way. They walk through these dark, cramped corridors, and Sei suddenly asks Leto why he isn't apologizing. He asks, "What for?" And she replies that her father tried to save him and so did her mother. But Leto asks what she's talking about. It was that blue scorpion who killed her family, and if anyone deserves an apology, it's him. If it hadn't been for the folk, his brother wouldn't have died. She thinks her father was wrong to try to save Leto, and Kane thinks there's a wide space at the end of the tunnel, so that means it's going to start now. Suddenly, several people appear from above, and Leto realizes that they are human. Kane says it makes sense now. No wonder the humans keep reappearing and counterattacking again and again, even after destroying so many of their castles. They were underground all this time, and they were all staring at Kane with knives. Kane says that this tone of voice sounds like they've been waiting for him. Then another person appears and says they were waiting. She noticed his red armor as he walked up the gray mountain and says, "Kane, the Knight of the Knife, one of the elven heroes, the elf who has killed the most humans in history." Kane replies, "And also the most handsome man in the world," but asks who she is since he doesn't remember her. She introduces herself as, and suddenly the stones around her begin to float, and Sei is impressed by this, and so is Kane. She says that she is the daughter of King Sot, who was killed and crucified a year ago, and that she is there to punish Kane by concentrating her power together with the stones. Tana floats too, and Leto is impressed by her ability. Kane thinks it's a very strange ability because it doesn't seem to involve the sixth sense at all. One of the humans says that they're going to buy time while Tana concentrates, but the older man next to him says that Leto looks human, doesn't he? Leto was staring at this moment, and the guy with the scar says he's going to take care of Leto. The others get excited because they're going to show off their new power. We see that they are all transforming with exoskeletons. Kane realizes that they are blinkers, and that they form a troop of blinkers. 4 blinkers are behind them now, and the one with the scar says that now he's going to show the strength of the humans. They jump up and separate very quickly. Kane thinks that there are so many strong people gathered there. He couldn't be happier than he is right now. Leto wonders what to do. Fight for or against the humans. Then one of the blinkers attacks Kane and throws him away. The one with the scar grabs Leto by the neck and throws him to the ground too, saying that Leto is also a winker, isn't he? He asks where Leto was tagged, but Leto simply kicks the guy away. He dodges, picks up speed, and slams into Leto, knocking him down. down. When Leto gets up, he's hung by this guy with the scar. He says that Leto was very lucky to be bitten by a blinking spider and gain these special powers. He's using this power without a sixth sense and hasn't gone crazy yet. He asks if Leto got these powers by flattering that elf. Suddenly, Leto's eye begins to transform, and the scar winker feels something very strange, as if the eyes of the female spider herself were staring at him. He thinks this guy is really weird, but Leto, on the ground, says he's not on the same side as this elf. But he doesn't even listen. Leto kicks him in the head. The one with the scar says he'll hear the details later, and for now he'd better take a nap. At that moment, the big winker was holding Sei, and she told him that that place was safe. He wondered why there was a Cerberus there, but suddenly they hear a scream. One of the winkers is screaming for his friend. He jumps up to try and save him, but Kane has already plunged the knife into his eye. Kane says it was good to meet him. It was quite a competition on the battlefield. He asks if there are any more of this type, and if there is anyone more powerful than him. But the other one, who has a scorpion's tail, jumps up and manages to grab Kane, throwing him into the wall. He gets very angry and says he's going to kill Kane now, but Kane dodges his tail and throws him away with his knife. The human was crying and very angry, saying that Kane had killed Vine. He was a nice guy, and he would never forgive Kane. But just as he was about to turn, the other human tells him to calm down, because they can't let their feelings take over the fight. Their enemy is the famous Kane. They can't let that happen. The one with the scar says that they have to fight to buy time, not to kill him, because Tana will do the rest. So they go at it together, but Kane doesn't seem to be afraid. This time he asks Saran for 2 broken seals, and the armor says yes to its master. Then, the cut he makes hits the 3 blinkers, who move away, all bewildered. The one with the tail goes for Kane again, who dodges easily, and with those less fiery blades, tries to cut off the blinker's arm. The scarred one tries to warn him, but it's too late because Kane rips off his right arm. Just as he was about to finish off that human, Kane senses something. He looks back and sees a white light. Tana was about to use her magic, and Kane for the first time was caught off guard. He didn't know what it was. He asks Saran for all the power she has, but ends up being hit, and Saran is completely fragmented. A little later, we see someone slowly waking up and wondering where he was. The one with the scar tells Leto that he's finally awake. He says that from now on, Leto just has to do as he's told, and he won't get hurt. The cage door is open, so he just has to get out. He comes out and stares at the guy for a moment. He throws an apple to Leto and says that this apple is very valuable, not least because there aren't many trees in the West, and most of them have been seized by the Elves. He was also reading Sei's book and said that he'd read everything in it and was interested in the girl who'd written it all, if he wanted to have a chat with her afterwards. Then he closes the book and says he's going to ask Leto some questions. He could torture him until he confesses, but in the end, they are 2 humans, so he would be grateful if Leto would answer willingly. Leto asks what that question is, and the one with the scar asks which side he's on because he was traveling with Volk, an elf. After a while, Leto has told his whole story, and the one with the scar says that he's had a hard time, captured as a slave, bitten by a spider, and that Leto followed Kane because he didn't have much choice, did he? Then the one with the scar blows out the candle and says they're going for a walk because there are more people who want to talk to him. As they walk, Leto asks where they are, since he's never seen a cave as big as this one. The one with the scar says that it's right in the middle of Tabone Mountain, and even the people in the West don't know much about it. This place was discovered by humans who lost out to the Elves and hid here. He explains that there are large spaces in which humans can move and which are interconnected. Inside these holes, the air circulates well and the light reflects very well, so it's not that dark. There's even water flowing down from the surface. He also says that the holes are useful for surprise attacks. It was thanks to this cave that they managed to recover several castles, and he asks Leto if he thinks the humans have lost the war. But no, the humans will never lose this war. At that moment, Leto comes across a large underground civilization of humans. The one with the scar continues to explain to Leto that there are dozens of common spaces like this inside Tabone Mountain, and they are gathering all the humans capable of fighting in this place. So far, they have an army of around 1,000 soldiers. Leto is impressed by this number of humans. He says that even with so many people, it might not be enough yet, right? The one with the scar says he's right, because the Elves are much better in combat than the humans. And with the folks on the Elves side, the situation gets even worse, because they have far more numbers. Passing through a gate, the one with the scar says that they have another source of power. When they discovered this place here in the depths of Tabone, it was originally a spider colony. Leto is impressed by this, and the one with the scar says that this was a colony of blinking spiders and that the humans fought them to take this place. After several sacrifices, they finally managed to claim this place as the humans' base, until they approach a guard, whom the one with the scar calls Pikur. Pikur asks if the king is inside, and the guard says yes and lets them pass. Pikur says that Leto already knows, but being bitten by a blinking spider gives you a lot of powers. If you're bitten by a female, you not only gain enhanced physical abilities, but you also gain an exoskeleton. He says that this is the true power of humans, the blinking spider. Leto comes across this female blinking spider in chains, and someone else who was already there says that Leto has seen one of these, hasn't he? We see that it's a girl with big hair, and Pikur says that this is their queen, Tana. Leto finds this very strange because she's so young and already a queen. She asks where he came from, and Pikur says that his name is Leto, and that he has been hiding in the eastern forest all this time, because he was captured by the elves and kept as a slave. And he says that after a few questions, it's clear that Leto isn't on the side of the elves. As for the spider that bit him, Pikur is sure he knows which one it is. Leto asks what he's talking about, and Pikur explains that while they were fighting the spiders to take that place, they found a nest of female blinking spiders. One of them disappeared at the time, probably the spider that bit Leto. Pikur says that only the female spider can give that kind of power, so they're going to use it to crush the elves. Leto asks if the elf is dead, but Pikur says that Kane is being kept in a special zone because they're going to extract everything they can from him. Leto is worried about Sandal and Say, and Tana tells him that Cerber has escaped, along with the other prisoners. The prisoners are used as experiments, and Leto wonders what kind of experiment this is. Meanwhile, Kane, in his cage, is completely chained up. He couldn't move properly or free himself from these chains. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break free. Kane thinks that when his armor was destroyed, he had only released 2 stages of power, and with his current strength, he can't pull out that T-bone steel. He reflects that sealing his power in the living armor means that he has locked his own strength inside a subconscious space, closing the door. Now, that key has been taken away from him. Even if it is possible to open the lock without a key, he will be very weakened. If anyone were to stab him, he would die instantly. He thinks it will take too long and that there will be too many side effects. At that moment, he's in a life or death situation, and he thinks it's wonderful. He's finally feeling that tension of combat again, that feeling he's only ever felt on the battlefield. One day, he only limited his own power, so that one day he could feel it again. He believes he has finally achieved it, until one of the humans, that mustachioed one, shows up and says that Kane is having a lot of fun for someone who's in prison. He calls him Kane, the Knife, the commander of the Red Army, the greatest knight of the resistance. The human says that he stood guard over Kane, afraid that he would break free of his chains. It seems it wasn't in vain, or perhaps Kane is nothing without his living armor. Meanwhile, we see another person arriving on the battlefield. This person was imagining a face in the stones, the face of Kane. We see that it is Terrell who is there, saying that this is where her love story with Kane will begin. In the next scene, we see a human walking past a cage where there are many Volks. Sai asks another Volk what they are doing there and what this place is. The Volk replies that they were captured by these humans, just like her, but they don't know why they were locked up there. Then another Volk comments that the humans are losing the war, so they captured them to negotiate with the Elves or something. He believes that the humans won't kill them. The other Volk says that they always take a Volk from here periodically, and he never comes back, but the Volk believes that the Elves will rescue them one day, since they're winning the war. The Volk says they will, just as they did before, when they freed them from human slavery. Say thinks about where Leto is, but wonders why she's worried about him, until a human approaches the cage. He enters, glances at everyone, and calls out to one of the Volks. He grabs what looks like a Volk child, who asks to be rescued and starts crying. Say is the one holding the child, who asks the human where he's taking him, but is kicked in the face. While the child is begging for help, he's dragged out of the cage, and Say asks where they are taking him. The other Volk, also desperate, says he doesn't know, and she can only hear the child's cries for help. This person is taken to where Leto is, who also begins to hear the cries. The human carries the Volk, telling him to shut up, but the Volk won't stop crying and asking for help. Leto asks where they got that Volk from, and Pikur says that they live near Tibone Mountain and Guanutes, so they've captured a lot of them. The human simply throws the Volk down that hole. Then the human starts turning a crank and a chain goes down. The Volk sees what's happening through the blindfold. The blinking spider slowly descends towards him, ready to devour him as he calls out for help. But of course, those screams soon cease because he has been devoured. Leto asks what that is, and Pikur tells him it's mealtime. While the spider is hungry, it becomes very sensitive, and it's difficult to extract the venom from it. Pikur sends the spider back up. When it climbs up, it's full of blood, but seems calmer. A man approaches, and Pikur asks if he's ready. He replies that he is, and that he has been training hard for this day. Pikur explains that when the female is satisfied, she looks for a host to lay her eggs. At that moment, the human offers his arm to be bitten. He is bitten by the blinking spider, which begins to spread its venom. Pikur explains that the female lays eggs once a week, so every week a new blinking warrior is created. invited there. But the hardest part is removing the baby spiders and the eggs, and most of the time the host dies. However, this is now a thing of the past, because after several experiments with the Volks, they have learned the method of removing the eggs without killing the host easily. Then Leto looks at the hole, which is full of Volks' bodies, and Piker says he doesn't feel guilty about it, because their sin is to have been born a Volk. He tells Leto that next week the next food will be that girl he brought. Meanwhile, Sim was completely injured. It looked like he was being tortured by a human with a whip. The torturer says that Kane knows well. Pain is never familiar, it's always fresh. After being tortured several times, perhaps Kane finally begs for his life. He continues to beat Kane's back, saying that even if Kane screams, nothing will save him in this place. He continues to whip Kane, but in one move, Kane catches the whip with his mouth, disarms the torturer, and makes him trip over the chain that imprisons Kane. The torturer falls on his shoulder, and Kane simply bites the human's face. While biting the guy's nose, Kane says it's true. The pain will never be familiar. The guy only asked for mercy to get out of there, but after that, he is bitten over and over again by Kane, until only his screams are heard. Later, someone comes down to check on Kane's cell, and when Kane sees this person, he tells him that he has a request to remove that guy next to him, because this cell doesn't have room for 2 people. The human realizes that Kane is much worse than he expected. Meanwhile, Leto was dreaming that he was killing lots and lots of Volks. He was out of control with the power of the spider. Then he sees his brother Avon, but when he gets to him, his brother says that he has an arrow in his chest and that it hurts a lot. Suddenly, the vision he sees is of a Volk asking for help, at which point Leto wakes up in his bed, remembering everything that happened. He remembers that Volk he killed, who said he had a family, Volk Damon, who took him into his home, and Aven saying that he didn't care that those people were folks. But he also remembers Piker saying that being born a folk was a sin. At that moment, Leto didn't know who to trust. As he leaves his room, the human guards who are there tell Leto that it's not the best time for him to be walking around. If he's curious to get to know the place, he can do so quickly. Leto asks where the folks who were captured are, and the guard asks why he wants to know. Leto says it's because a Volk took something from him, and he wants it back. The guard replies that if that's the case, just go there because the prison is underground. So Leto leaves, while the guards look at him with evil eyes. In prison, Sei suddenly hears a sound. It's Leto calling for her upstairs in that manhole. He asks if she's all right, but by the look on her face, she wasn't. Leto asks if she was crying, and Sei tells him that there is a door leading into the prison. Leto tells her to keep her voice down, and asks where the door is. She points down there. The Volks ask if it's someone she knows. She says yes, he'll help them get out. But the Volk says of course not. He's human and will never help them. Leto finds the door and thinks he can break the lock. He tells Sei to get away, but then thinks better of it and asks Sei, teasing her if it's good to be trapped in there. Leto says that these green scum deserve to be locked up. It's time for them to die, as many humans have already died because of them. Sei says she should never have trusted him, let alone her father. Leto walks away, saying that all the green scum will rot there, and one day he'll get what's his with her, which she's probably hidden somewhere. But Leto didn't want to say that. He thinks he's definitely being watched. There are definitely humans hiding in there. The humans would never trust him, as he's only just arrived there, so they're probably watching him closely. First, he needs to win the humans' trust, and then escape. Leto was right, because Piker's eye was watching from one of the holes. A little later, as he was leaving the place, he met up with Piker, who invited Leto to the cafeteria for a bite to eat. They were eating a kind of soup full of insects. Piker says that these insects are the most protein-packed food they'll ever find. He comments that the humans' priority now is to create an army of blinkers, and that they are using the female blinker to create an army of super soldiers. Their goal is to create 1,000 blinking soldiers, but he explains that there are many obstacles in the way. Even if they manage to make that kind of soldier, most of them die very quickly, or lose their minds when they become monsters. That's why they want to study Leto. He's become a monster, but he hasn't lost his sanity. Piker says that those with blue eyes are the males of the blinkers. The power Leto received was from the blue spider. If you categorize everyone alive so far who has become a blinker, it's the power of the male, but not Leto. He stayed alive for so long receiving the power of the green blinking spider, the female. And Piker says that the first time they met, he felt something very strange in Leto, as if his body rejected the idea of attacking him. This happens because males obey females. He's going to confirm this by doing some research with Leto now, and if Leto wants to, he'll be a great help in the army. Piker says that he will cooperate, but not for the sake of humanity's victory. Leto, a little hesitant, replies that of course he will help, but asks what will happen to the Volks if the humans win. Piker replies that it's not obvious. They'll kill everyone. They'll exterminate the blue scum and the green scum, and they'll gouge out all their eyes. Meanwhile, Tyrell, all happy, walks around looking for Lord Kane in that desolate field of sadness and loneliness. Only now does she stop to think about how she's going to find Kane in a place as big as this. She remembers a moment when she asked Butter Pofork, the Lord of Broken Bone Castle, and Puff said that Kane hadn't been there. He very very much doubts that Cain will make it there, because he knows that if he went in, he would come out dead. Puff mentions that Cain isn't even a pure elf, but he's heard of Count Pilar, who was killed by Cain at that masked ball. He says that he was very moved by Tyrell's attitude in coming all this way to avenge her family, and that she has permission to cross to the west. Tyrell begins to think that she has come to the west, but she has no idea where Cain is. She believes that the power of love will guide her, that splendorous love, that star that is Cain in this vast universe. She just needs to find his glow, that little star in this dark universe. But when she gets close to that glint, it's actually Vlad's eye, and she wonders what that ugly star is. Meanwhile, in the human colony, we see two children wrestling with sticks. Then someone grabs a child's arm, looks at it, and sees that there's purple on the child's arm. It's Lord Uger, who asks if it's a bruise on his hand, but apologizes and lets the child play. He warns the child that this type of blemish can appear during adolescence, especially if his blood is mixed with that of another race, so he'd better not let his guard down. The child, terrified, says, "Yes, sir." Then someone calls Buggle because the queen wants to see him. We see a meeting table with the queen and some people, and Buggle, pointing to the map, says that according to the scouts, Lubro Castle was captured a few days ago. It was a territory with vast farmland, responsible for most of the army's supplies and logistics. The queen says that it was known as the Impenetrable Fortress, and asks if it was the Red Army that did this. Buggle replies that no, it was just a Volk's army. The queen wonders why the Red Army didn't show up this time, and wonders why such a ruthless army, which was tearing down all the castles, suddenly stopped. Peeker comments that it must be because of Cain, but someone else at the table says that he is only a restricted knight. There must be many other knights who can rule that army, just as Cain did. The queen says that since the war began, many great leaders have been born, but also many heroes have fallen on each side of the war. However, the humans, with their superior military power, continued to push the elves back. It was at that time that it seemed the humans' victory was inevitable, until an elf warrior began to attract attention, Cain Bolson. He defeated the most powerful humans one by one, brought all the elves, all the armies, back together under a single banner, and under the name of the Red Army killed all the human forces. Anna says that after Cain took command of the Red Army for 30 years, the human kingdom was pushed to the edge of the western lands. Then another says that now that the legendary Cain is trapped there with them, why isn't the Red Army moving to save him? The Red Army Anna replies that they're not moving because Cain is the real commander of that army. Then the guy says that he must kill Cain now, because if he dies, the elves will fall apart at once. But Pakur says no, because if word of his death spreads, it would cause the Red Army to unleash a fury, and the humans need more time. Buggle says he understands the fool's feelings, but he can't act on emotion in a war. A little later, we see Pakur with a knife in Leto's face, and he says he's going to cut Leto's wrist right now, under anesthesia. That might hurt a bit. Leto thinks that, even though he's had his arm cut several times, he still hasn't gotten used to the pain. Suddenly, Pakur says that he's going to kill Cain tomorrow, and that the human army will soon set off to recover the captured castle. To boost the army's morale, they will execute Cain in front of everyone. At this point, Pakur is confiding in Leto. They want to join forces with him to win the human victory. Pakur comments that he is impressed by Leto's regeneration, which is better than that of an elf. He was paying attention to that piece of Cain's armor, and suddenly Pakur says that it's all done. That's enough for today. After all, he also has to prepare for their new campaign. As Leto was leaving, one of the children calls out to him, saying that Leto is also a winker, isn't he? He asks how many Volks and how many elves he's killed. He says that when he grows up, he too will become a winker and kill lots and lots of elves. Leto simply asks if he wants to become a monster. As the children whisper, he leaves, passing everyone and going down the stairs in silence. This time he sees Cain's cell and says that, through Cain's eyes, he plans to escape from there. Leto asks Cain to make him laugh. If he succeeds, Leto will spare him. They both sit in silence, staring at each other, and then Cain begins to tell a story. A long time ago, there was an elf child raised by humans. These humans had folks as slaves, but because the elf's skin was blue, something the humans had never seen before, he was considered a rare species and became a spectacle. To demonstrate this blue creature's incredible regenerative abilities, the humans tortured him. The boy thought that one day he would get used to the pain. At the age of 15, the humans crossed the entire continent to escape the winter and found a blue-skinned people. At first there was mistrust on the part of the humans, then came hatred, and finally, war. So that blue-skinned boy ran away from the human camp and joined the ranks of the elves. He became a soldier and fought against the humans, cheating death more times than he could count. But having lived among humans, the boy knew their ways and weaknesses. When he became an adult on the battlefield, he made a decision. In that hell full of terrible monsters, he would become a demon and rise above them all. He would become the king of that hell. Leto asks what will happen if this boy becomes king. Cain replies that in that kingdom there will be no divisions based on skin color, only between who is strong and who is weak. Leto says that this is neither amusing nor interesting, and throws a piece of Kane's armor. Leto says he's only found this piece, and if it's not enough, he'll look for more. But Kane says it's enough, and asks Saran to wake up and join his body immediately. Saran's mask joins Kane's chest, and she tells her master that she's very hungry, and that's why she's not as strong. At that moment, Leto offers his arm, saying that Saran can eat as much as he wants. After having a nice meal, Kane asks Saran for his power back. The armor asks how much he wants, and Kane says he wants all the stored power. Meanwhile, in Pakur's office, the children call out to him, saying they've brought some apples. The children ask him what he's reading that's so interesting, and he replies that it's a book brought by one of the Volks. He opens it out of boredom, but it's actually quite interesting, and he's doing some research based on it. Just then, the other child catches Pakur's eye and asks where the mask is. Seeing this, Pakur becomes desperate. Meanwhile, Queen Tana is concentrating on entering the mind of the female blinkers until someone warns her of something. The queen says she's very busy and that it has to be something urgent, but the human tells her that Kane has escaped. The queen orders them to gather all the blinking soldiers and move the children to safety. As the soldier is leaving, suddenly the queen's nose begins to bleed. All the humans who can fight move to the front line, lurking and waiting for Kane to come out. When Kane comes out, he says that these humans living in that cave look like really annoying little spiders, don't they? And Boba jumps in, saying he just wants revenge. Then the whole army of humans goes up, and Kane says that he is the Knight of the Knife, a name he earned fighting on the battlefield. In front of him, there are no humans, just pieces of meat. After that, more people show up and Buggle sees what's going on, but he only comes across bodies, mainly Boba's. He says that Kane has once again taken the life of one of his comrades. And also his own daughter. One of the people warns him that the captain is being taken over by the Blinker's power and that this is dangerous, but he tells everyone to stay away because he's going to kill this monster called Kane. At that moment, Kane remembers when he was called a monster by that same human who said that Kane is a monster, just like everyone else who has blue or green skin. Humans are the true owners of this land and the true descendants of the albino god himself, while these creatures with different skin, blue and green, have polluted the land and deserve to disappear. Kane replies that humans are all idiots who believe in a god, mentioning gods that he doesn't even know if they really exist or not, tailoring the information to his own convenience, just like witches. Has this human ever wondered how many Volks he has killed so far, and used that god as an excuse? Kane says that everyone there is a monster, and Buggle says that yes, he will kill Kane, even if he becomes a monster. Meanwhile, in that underground prison of the Volks, they're listening to everything upstairs and wondering what's going on. Everyone is hopeful that they will finally be freed. Say hears a strange noise, and when he opens the cage, there's Leto who tells Say to leave with everyone now. Volk is surprised to see that it's that kid who showed up a few days ago. Say is already guiding everyone to get out of there, but Leto tells her to leave the folks behind because she needs to get out alive now. But Say doesn't want to leave the Volks behind. As Leto stares at them, he begins to think about it. Meanwhile, a fight is going on between Buggle and Kane. Kane manages to withstand Buggle's blow and says that becoming a monster is very easy. You just have to give in completely to power, abandon any conscience you have, and surrender to madness. It doesn't matter what you believe or trust. To become a monster, just follow the process. But no matter how strong these monsters are, they can never be the protagonists of the story. Even though he's much stronger, Buggle can't penetrate Kane's defense and asks him to stop talking nonsense. Buggle realizes that his consciousness is slowly fading, but at least he's gaining a much more powerful instinct, like a predator after its prey. So that means becoming a monster. He stomps and sinks Kane, but Kane goes on to say that this kind of monster is just an extra in the great story that is life. Kane is referring to people who become as strong as monsters, but don't become monsters like demons. At that moment, Kane slashes the leg of the Winker who tries to fight back but can't. Buggle wonders how Kane can be so powerful, even though he has become a monster. Perhaps Kane is right. After all, he is a demon. Meanwhile, Leto sneaks through the corridors, guiding the Volks to escape. He says he's going ahead to distract the enemies, and they pass. A Volk stops to thank Leto, but he turns away again without answering. Leto continues to advance cautiously, thinking that there is no one there. Basically, everyone has gone after Kane. At this point, he needs to find a way out, but suddenly someone throws an apple at him. It was Pakur, who was intercepting the path. Pakur says that's the last apple Leto will ever eat, so he'd better take a bite now.